if you don't listen to me, we're getting a divorce. I can't stay married to someone who says such selfish things. I accept the divorce, even though my husband is acting smart and doesn't know what's coming next. My name is Emily. I've been married for 5 years, and I'm 35. It's just me and my husband. We've wanted children but haven't been able to have any yet. We thought about fertility treatments, but my husband didn't want to go through with it, so we left it to chance. If we don't have kids, it would just be us. After we got married, both of my husband's parents passed away, and we didn't have time for treatments. My husband is quite controlling. At work, he was a senior and often called me his foolish wife in front of others. He scolded me harshly if I made a mistake. This behavior didn't change after we got married. Though he seems like a bad person, he does have a gentle side. He gave me good advice when I was his subordinate and helped me when I was feeling down after my grandfather died. That support led us to start dating and eventually marry. Since getting married, I've stopped working and become a full-time housewife. My husband usually comes home after 9 p.m. because of his job. When he gets home, I greet him and help with his clothes, but he doesn't say much. I prepare dinner, and he eats quietly. After dinner, he goes to the bathroom, and I get his towel and underwear ready. He then heads straight to bed. He's always been quiet, and recently, his new job promotion seems to have made him even more tired. We don't talk much anymore, but I still trust and love him. He was there for me when I had a tough time. I lost my father in middle school and my mother when I was in my first year of high school. After that, my grandfather took me in and raised me with a lot of love. I wanted to show my appreciation by saving money from my job, taking him on trips, and sharing good times with him. I enjoyed spending time with my grandfather and wished he could stay healthy forever. But 3 years after I started working, my grandfather passed away from lung cancer. I was left completely alone. I knew I'd have to say goodbye eventually, but I didn't expect it to be so soon. I regretted not being able to do more for him or spend more time together. I was very sad and cried every night. My then boss, who is now my husband, noticed my sadness. He was kind and listened to me, telling me I had been through a lot and did well. I felt lucky to have him as a boss. Normally strict and intimidating, he was gentle and supportive during that tough time. I know he's a kind person deep down, which is why I wanted to stay with him. One afternoon, the home phone rang. It was my husband's younger brother, who I hadn't heard from in a while. He asked to speak to my husband. I told my husband about the call, and he answered the phone with a smile. His younger brother, 15 years younger than him, is someone my husband really cares about. He's been living happily with his wife for 2 years. But when my husband's tone suddenly became serious, I knew something was wrong. After hanging up, he told me that his brother had been laid off from his job. I was shocked, as I hadn't expected this at all. My brother-in-law is very different from my husband. He's kind, calm, and respectful. He always defends me when my husband is rude and apologizes for his behavior. I have a good impression of him and his wife. I wanted to help them in any way I could. I asked my husband if there was something I could do, but he gave me a sharp look and asked what I meant by something. I suggested to my husband that we should do something to help his brother feel better. He sighed heavily and said that I wouldn't understand because I haven't been part of the working world. He told me that it wasn't my place to suggest anything, and his harsh response surprised me. I meant well, but it seemed I had upset him. I asked him if I wasn't part of the family too, but he said I was just his wife, not his brother's family. His words hurt deeply. I had never seen him act so aggressively before. His brother being laid off must have been a huge shock for him, but his harshness was unexpected. He told me not to do anything unnecessary and walked out. After that, he became even more demanding and critical of me. He complained about the meals I prepared and compared me unfavorably to his brother's wife. His unreasonable behavior was confusing, and I didn't know what had changed. One day, my husband began sorting through things and filling garbage bags. I was puzzled but didn't interface because our relationship had become so strained that I didn't have the energy to talk to him. Then he told me that we needed to start packing because we were moving out. He said he was giving the house to his brother and his wife. I was shocked and confused by his decision. My husband suddenly decided to give our house to his unemployed brother and his wife. I asked why he was doing this out of the blue, and he shouted at me to be quiet. I pointed out that giving away the house didn't solve our living situation. He insisted that, as his brother was in trouble, he needed to help him, and we would figure out where to live later. I was confused and suspicious. My brother-in-law wouldn't just take our house without question. As I was about to confront my husband, he handed me divorce papers and told me that if I was only going to argue, I was of no use to him. He demanded I leave immediately. I was shocked by his sudden decision, but felt it might be for the best. I picked up the divorce papers and signed them. My husband watched me with a smug smile, which almost made me laugh at how absurd he looked. After signing, I reminded him that the house wasn't his to give away. It was my house, inherited from my grandfather. My husband was stunned. I explained that he had moved into my house before we were married because he didn't want to pay rent, and I've been paying the property taxes ever since. He had never contributed anything. My husband seemed flustered and said it didn't matter since we would soon be divorced. I told him that his behavior was unbelievable and selfish, and we needed to calm down. I let all my frustrations out on my husband. I loved him and thought he loved me too, but maybe I was wrong. I never expected our marriage to end so quickly. Emily, wait, this is a misunderstanding. Let's talk, he said. Talk about what? You were the one who wanted a divorce, I replied. I carefully put away the filled-out divorce papers, planning to submit them first thing tomorrow morning. My husband lay on the floor, dazed, and muttered, "No, this can't be happening." I told him coldly that this was my house and he needed to leave immediately. Once the papers were filed, we would be strangers. I felt no sympathy for him. Even when he cried and clung to me, he eventually left, resigned to his fate. The news of our divorce spread quickly at his work, and he was immediately looked down upon. Rumors about our divorce and his behavior during our marriage circulated widely. It seemed he had lost his standing at his company. I wondered who spread those rumors, but all I did was answer questions from his colleagues and subordinates. About 6 months after the divorce, I ran into someone I hoped not to see while leaving a real estate agency. My ex-husband. It seemed he had been waiting for me outside the agency. The situation was unsettling, and even when I tried to ignore him, he followed me persistently. Frustrated, I agreed to talk. Enough. If you have something to say, just say it, I told him. Emily, I've always despised you, he said. His sudden claim left me confused. He said he had been blaming me for his brother's job loss. Why would it be my fault? I asked. Since we got married, he said only bad things happened, like his parents dying and his injury. But his father was already sick before we married, and his mother was frail. His injury was due to his own clumsiness when he got drunk and fell. Despite this, he believed I was responsible for all his misfortunes. So you think I'm the cause of all your problems and that's why you hated me? I said. I always thought you were just awkward, but you actually despised me. I was frustrated with his refusal to take responsibility and his constant blaming of others. I couldn't believe someone like him could be a supervisor. I worried about his subordinates who might be unfairly criticized. He continued to tell me about his misfortunes even after our divorce. He showed me burns from a recent fire that destroyed his apartment, and he mentioned losing his wallet, making mistakes at work, and his brother's coldness towards him. Honestly, I don't feel sorry for you, I said. These are the results of your own actions. I have nothing to do with them. Please, Emily, come back to me, he begged. We've been together for so long. I took care of things when you were working and helped you when your grandfather died. Looking at him, trying to guilt-trip me, made me shiver. All your problems come from your own actions. Maybe you should look at yourself and stop blaming others. With that, I walked away, ignoring his desperate calls. My ex-husband was calling out to me, trying to get my attention, but I ignored him and blended into the crowd. About a week after our divorce, I got a call from my former brother-in-law. Emily, well, you're not my sister-in-law anymore, he said. I'm sorry, but I wanted to talk about my brother. He explained that the decision to give the house to his brother was made by my ex-husband alone. His wife and he had no idea about it. My former brother-in-law said he and his wife felt sorry for how my ex-husband treated me, and he thought it was good that we divorced. He wished me happiness. I thanked him, and he told me he found a job and was managing to get by. I was happy for him. He mentioned he planned to distance himself from his brother, which is why my ex-husband couldn't reach him. And now, my ex-husband, who had lost his wife and was estranged from his younger brother, was truly alone. I hoped he would understand the consequences of his mistakes, but for now, I needed to completely cut him out of my life. On the day I ran into my ex-husband, I had just signed a contract to rent out the house I inherited from my grandfather. It was too big for me, but I couldn't let go of the house full of memories. I preferred to have someone who wanted to live there. I decided to change my phone number, move, and completely sever ties with my ex-husband. At 35, I still have a long life ahead of me.
I never meant to snoop through my husband's phone. Trust had always been our foundation, but that changed the moment I saw the notification pop up on his screen while he was in the shower. A message from Claire, written in a peculiar mix of French and English that made my heart skip a beat. My name is Harper, and until that morning I thought I had the perfect marriage. On SC Voigt tonight at the usual spot? J'ai something important to tell you. Don't tell it. They had to be me. As a linguist, the code switching between languages caught my attention immediately. It wasn't casual Franglish, it felt deliberate, like they were trying to obscure the meaning from someone. From me. I heard the shower turn off and quickly placed Ethan's phone back on the nightstand, exactly as I'd found it. My hands were trembling as I pretended to fold laundry, my mind racing with possibilities I didn't want to consider. Hey, beautiful, Ethan said, emerging from the bathroom with a towel around his waist. Water droplets traced paths down his chest, and for a moment I saw him as I always had, the kind, gentle veterinarian I'd fallen in love with. Everything okay? You look a bit pale. Just tired, I lied, forcing a smile. Long week of translations. He crossed the room and kissed my forehead, leaving a damp spot that felt like it was burning into my skin. Don't work too hard. We've got dinner at my parents' tonight, remember? My stomach clenched. The monthly dinner at the Callahan estate. Another reminder that I'd married into a family that saw me as an outsider. Of course, I said, watching him get dressed for work. Will Claire be there? Pause before his answer was microscopic, but I caught it. No, why would she be? Just asking. She seems to be around a lot lately. Ethan's shoulders tensed slightly as he buttoned his shirt. She's an old friend, Harper. You know that. An old friend who had been showing up at his clinic with increasing frequency, who texted in code, who wanted to meet him secretly. The weight of unspoken words hung between us like a storm cloud. I should head out, he said, checking his watch. Early surgery today. Love you. Love you too, I replied automatically, the words tasting different now. After he left, I sat on our bed, staring at his side of the closet. The expensive suits his mother insisted he wear, the casual clothes he preferred, all hanging there like normal. But nothing felt normal anymore. My phone buzzed, a text from Lydia, my sister-in-law. Looking forward to seeing you tonight, dear. Mother wants to discuss the summer house arrangements. Wear something appropriate this time. I deleted the message without responding. Lydia, with her perfect outfits and sharp smiles, never missed a chance to remind me that I didn't quite measure up to Callahan standards. But right now, her usual jabs felt trivial compared to the mystery unfolding on my husband's phone. I pulled out my laptop and opened my translation work, but the words blurred together. Instead, I found myself typing Claire Bennett into social media. Her profile was full of recent photos, charity galas, business meetings, and yes, several casual shots at Ethan's veterinary clinic. In one, they were both laughing, heads close together as they looked at something on his phone. The caption read, "Some secrets are worth keeping. Winking face #oldfriends #TBT." My finger hovered over the image. The timestamp showed it was posted 3 weeks ago, the same week Ethan started having emergency calls in the evenings. Tonight, while we sat through another tense family dinner, my husband would be keeping secrets with Claire Bennett, and I had to decide what I was going to do about it. Callahan Estate loomed before us like a fortress as Ethan pulled into the circular driveway. I smoothed my dress, a designer piece I'd saved 3 months to buy, hoping it would pass Margaret's inspection. Text message from this morning still burned in my mind, but I forced a smile as Ethan squeezed my hand. "Ready?" he asked. I nodded, noticing how his jaw tightened. He always got tense before these dinners. The massive front door swung open before we reached it. Lydia stood there, perfectly coiffed in a red dress that probably cost more than my monthly salary. "You're late," she said, air-kissing my cheek. "Mother's been asking about you, Ethan." "Traffic," he muttered, but I caught the slight tremor in his voice. The same tremor I'd heard when he denied meeting Claire tonight. The foyer echoed with our footsteps as we followed Lydia to the formal dining room. Margaret Callahan sat at the head of the table like a queen on her throne, while Thomas studied financial reports even at dinner. "Darling," Margaret said, rising to embrace Ethan. Her eyes swept over me, lingering on my dress. "Harper. Interesting choice of attire. Primebid bakaratort." The dress was perfect, I'd made sure of it. But nothing was ever good enough for Margaret Callahan. "Speaking of choices," Lydia chimed in, taking her seat, "I ran into Claire at the country club today." "She mentioned something about the clinic, Ethan?" My husband's fork clattered against his plate. "Just some consulting work," he said quickly. Too quickly. "Consulting?" Thomas finally looked up from his papers. "I wasn't aware the clinic needed financial consulting." "It doesn't," Ethan said, but Lydia was already talking over him. "Claire said she's helping with some exciting new developments. Didn't you want to tell everyone about that, brother dear?" The room felt suddenly airless. I watched Ethan's face, seeing the panic flash across it before he composed himself. "It's still in the early stages," he mumbled. "Well, I think it's wonderful," Margaret declared. "Claire has always had such a good head for business. Remember when you two dated in college, Ethan?" My water glass froze halfway to my lips. Dated? Ethan had never mentioned that. "Mother," Ethan warned, but Lydia was grinning like a cat with cream. "Oh, Harper didn't know?" They were quite the couple. "Everyone thought they'd end up together, didn't they, Daddy?" Thomas grunted in agreement, and I felt the room spin slightly. The secret meetings, the coded messages, the consulting work, everything shifted into a new, horrifying perspective. "It was barely 2 months," Ethan said, finally looking at me. "It wasn't serious. Serious enough that Claire still keeps that photo of you two in Paris," Lydia said innocently. "The one from your graduation trip?" I pushed my plate away, untouched. "Excuse me," I managed, standing up. "I need some air." "Harper, wait!" Ethan started to rise, but Margaret's voice cut through the tension. "Let her go, dear. Some people simply aren't built for family discussions." I fled to the garden, gulping in the cool evening air. Behind me, I heard the French doors open and close. Expecting Ethan, I turned, only to find Lydia approaching with 2 wine glasses. "Peace offering," she said, extending one to me. I took it warily, watching her settle onto a garden bench. "You know," she said, swirling her wine, "Claire's always been more our speed. The right background, the right connections. But Ethan chose you." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "For now." What's that supposed to mean? Just that things change. People realize their mistakes. Thinking of which, Claire mentioned she's looking at properties in our neighborhood. Isn't that interesting? My grip tightened on the wine glass. "Why are you telling me this?" Lydia stood, brushing invisible dust from her dress. Consider it a friendly warning. Some battles aren't worth fighting, Harper. Especially when you've already lost. She left me there, holding a glass of wine I wouldn't drink, while somewhere across town my husband was meeting the woman he'd never told me about. The woman his family clearly wished he'd married instead of me. I pulled out my phone and opened Claire's social media again. There it was, the Paris photo Lydia mentioned, buried in her old posts. Ethan and Claire, young and laughing, the Eiffel Tower behind them. The caption read, "Some memories never fade. Red heart." My hands stopped shaking as a cold clarity settled over me. If they wanted a battle, they'd get one. The next morning, I did something I'd never done before. I followed my husband to work. Ethan's emergency call the previous night had stretched until midnight, and when he finally came home, he smelled of expensive perfume and guilt. I parked across from his veterinary clinic, watching the morning unfold through my windshield. The familiar parade of patients, dogs pulling at leashes, cats in carriers, the occasional exotic pet. But at 10:30, a sleek Mercedes pulled into the staff parking lot. Claire stepped out, wearing a business suit that probably cost more than Ethan's monthly mortgage payment. My phone buzzed, a text from Lydia. "Thought you might want to know Claire's meeting with our family accountant today. Something about clinic investments." I switched off my phone and slipped into the clinic through the side entrance, nodding to the receptionist who knew me as Dr. Callahan's wife. The break room connected to Ethan's office through a thin wall, and voices carried if you knew where to listen. "The paperwork's ready," Claire was saying. "Once you sign, everything changes." "I don't know about this anymore." Ethan's voice was strained. Harper doesn't understand our world, Ethan. She never will. Your parents see that, why can't you?" A pause. My heart hammered against my ribs. "It's not that simple," Ethan said finally. "She's my wife. And I'm the one who's been here all along. The one who knows what you really want." Claire's voice softened. "Remember Paris? How simple things were then. That was different. We were different. Were we? Or did you just settle for less because it was easier than fighting for what you really wanted?" I'd heard enough. I pushed away from the wall, but my elbow caught a stack of files. They crashed to the floor, the sound impossibly loud in the quiet clinic. The office door flew open. Ethan stood there, face pale. Behind him, Claire looked more annoyed than surprised. "Harper," Ethan started, but I was already moving. "Don't." My voice came out steady, surprising even me. "Just don't. This isn't what you think," Claire said, stepping forward. "We're discussing business investments. The clinic needs what? Your money? Your connections? Or just you?" "Harper, please." Ethan reached for my arm, but I jerked away. "When were you going to tell me about the buyout?" The words were a shot in the dark, but Claire's slight flinch told me I'd hit something. "That's what this is about, isn't it? The paperwork, the meetings, the secrets?" "It's a business opportunity," Claire said smoothly. "The clinic could be so much more with proper backing. Ethan knows that. And I'm just in the way." I turned to my husband. "Is that why you've been lying? Meeting her in secret, hiding your past?" "I wanted to protect you," he said weakly. "From what?" "The truth. That your family's finally found a way to get what they want." I laughed, the sound harsh even to my ears. "A way to replace me with someone more suitable?" "That's not," Ethan started, but his phone chimed. Another message. I watched his face as he read it, saw the color drain away. "What is it?" Claire asked, moving closer to him than any business partner should. "Mother," he whispered. "She's calling an emergency family meeting. Tonight." Claire's perfectly painted lips curved into a smile. "Perfect timing. We can announce the partnership then." "Partnership," I repeated. The word tasted like ashes. "Is that what we're calling it?" I turned to leave, but Claire's voice stopped me. "Harper, the clinic's future isn't personal. It's just business. I looked back at them, the golden couple from the Paris photo, standing in an office that suddenly felt like it had never been mine to share. Everything's personal with the Callahans, I said. But don't worry. I'm done playing by their rules. I walked out of the clinic, my mind already racing with possibilities. If they wanted to play hardball, fine. I had languages, codes, and secrets of my own. And unlike Claire, I had nothing left to lose. Behind me, I heard Ethan call my name, but I didn't stop. Some things, once broken, can't be fixed. They can only be avenged. I ended up at my parents' small townhouse, the only place I could think clearly anymore. Mom was grading papers at the kitchen table, her reading glasses perched on her nose, while Dad tended to his beloved orchids in the window. The familiar scene made my throat tight. "I think my marriage is over," I said, dropping into a chair. Mom set down her red pen. Dad turned from his plants. Neither seemed surprised. "We saw the clinic's financial records," Dad said quietly. "They're public, sweetheart. Claire Bennett's company filed paperwork last week." Of course they had checked. 2 retired professors who taught me to always verify sources, to look beyond the surface meaning. I should have done the same with my marriage. "The emergency family meeting is tonight," I said, staring at the worn kitchen table where I'd done my homework for years. "They're going to announce the buyout. And probably more. What are you going to do?" Mom asked, her academics mind already analyzing the problem. Before I could answer, my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Meeting moved to Le Jardin Restaurant. 7 p.m. Dress appropriately. Margaret." Le Jardin. The same restaurant where Ethan had proposed 3 years ago. The cruelty wasn't lost on me. "I'm going to fight," I said, surprising myself with the certainty in my voice. "But I need your help." Dad pulled a folder from his briefcase. "We thought you might say that. Remember my friend in corporate law?" He spread out documents across the table. Financial records, property deeds, and something that made my heart stop, incorporation papers for the clinic dated 5 years ago, before I'd even met Ethan. "Claire's name is on everything," I whispered, scanning the papers. "She's been involved from the beginning." "There's more," Mom said gently. "Check the witnesses' signatures." There it was in elegant script, Lydia Callahan. She'd known everything, had probably orchestrated it all, feeding information to Margaret while playing the concerned sister. My phone buzzed again. "Ethan, where are you? We need to talk before tonight." I ignored it, focusing on the documents. "The clinic's in trouble, isn't it?" "These numbers." Dad nodded. "It's been operating at a loss for months. Claire's company has been keeping it afloat with loans. Loans that come due next week," Mom added. "The timing of this partnership isn't coincidental." Another text, this time from Lydia. "Wear black tonight. Suits the occasion." Face blowing a kiss. I stood up abruptly, my chair scraping against the floor. "I need to go home and change. If they want a show tonight, I'll give them one." "Harper," Mom called as I reached the door. "Remember what I taught you about translations?" I paused. "That the true meaning isn't always in the words themselves?" She smiled sadly. "Sometimes the story we think we're reading isn't the one being told." At home, I found Ethan waiting. He looked terrible, his usual confidence replaced by something closer to desperation. "I can explain everything," he started. "Can you explain Paris?" I interrupted. "Or the incorporation papers. Or how your clinic's been secretly owned by Claire's company since before we met." He flinched. "How did you?" "It doesn't matter. What matters is tonight. Are you going to tell them you're choosing me, or should I not bother showing up?" "Harper, please. Clinic is everything to me. Without Claire's help, you might have had to stand up to your family years ago." I moved past him toward our bedroom. "The meeting's at Le Jardin now. Your mother's idea, I assume." His silence was answer enough. I pulled out the dress I'd been saving for our anniversary, deep red, not the black Lydia suggested. One last question, Ethan. That night you proposed at Le Jardin, was that your idea? Or was that orchestrated too? He couldn't meet my eyes. I'll pick you up at 6:30. Don't bother, I said, laying out the dress. Il mi ayudar. I have a stop to make first. As he left, I opened my laptop and pulled up the translation project I'd been working on. Legal documents, as it happened. I might not have Claire's money or Lydia's social connections, but I had something they didn't, the ability to read between the lines. And tonight, every single truth was coming out. Le Jardin's crystal chandeliers cast a deceptively warm glow over the private dining room. I arrived 15 minutes early, my red dress a deliberate rebellion against Lydia's black dress directive. The maitre d' recognized me immediately. Madame Callahan, your party is... It's still Winslow, I corrected, scanning the room. Empty, except for one person, Claire, wearing a perfectly tailored black dress, examining a document at the head of the table. She looked up, unsurprised. Harper. Early as usual. Interesting choice of venue, I said, taking the seat opposite her. Was this where you and Ethan planned everything? Back when you first invested in his clinic. Her perfectly manicured fingers tapped the document. You've done your homework. But you're missing crucial pieces of the puzzle. Like what? The part where you've been manipulating him for years? Or how Lydia helped you do it? Claire's laugh was surprisingly genuine. You think I'm the villain here? Sweetheart, I'm just cleaning up Lydia's mess. As usual. Before I could respond, the door opened. Lydia swept in, followed by Margaret and Thomas. Ethan trailed behind, looking trapped. Harper, Margaret's voice could have frozen champagne. That dress is... bold. Like your choice of restaurant? I smiled, noting how Lydia positioned herself between Ethan and me. Actually, Claire stood, I chose the venue. For symmetry. Thomas cleared his throat. Let's get to business. The papers are ready. Almost. Claire pulled out a folder. Just waiting on one signature. Harper's. The room went silent. Ethan's head snapped up. What? Lydia's voice cracked slightly. She has no part in this. Actually, she does. Claire slid a document across the table. The clinic's original incorporation papers list both Callahan siblings as beneficiaries. Ethan and Lydia. My hands remained folded in my lap. But Lydia sold her share. To you, Harper. Through a shell company 3 months ago. Claire's smile was razor sharp. She was desperate for cash after her last failed business venture. She didn't read the fine print. Lydia's face drained of color. That's impossible. I never. The transfer documents are in French, I cut in, finally understanding. A language you claim to speak, but actually can't. Unlike me. Margaret's hand gripped her wine glass too tightly. This is absurd. But Thomas was already reviewing the papers, his businessman's eyes catching what his daughter had missed. It's legal, he said quietly. Harper owns 40% of the clinic. Without her signature, there can be no buyout. Ethan stared at me, then at his sister. Lydia, what did you do? What she always does, I said, standing. She overplayed her hand. Those late-night calls you thought were between Ethan and Claire? They were Lydia, begging Claire to cover her gambling debts. You little, Lydia lunged forward, but Claire caught her arm. Enough, Claire snapped. This ends now. Harper, name your price. I pulled out my own document. Already done. Full ownership of the clinic transfers to Ethan. Alone. No family interference, no outside investors. And in return? Thomas asked. I walk away. From everything. The marriage, the family, all of it. I met Ethan's devastated gaze. It's what you wanted, isn't it? Freedom from having to choose? Harper, please, he started, but Margaret cut him off. Done. Thomas, call the lawyers. Not done, I said, my voice steady despite my racing heart. One more condition. Tell them, Claire. Tell them what really happened in Paris. Claire's composure cracked just slightly. That's not relevant. I stood, gathering my things. Everything's relevant when you're rewriting history. You have until midnight to decide. Oh, and Lydia? I paused at the door. Black really isn't your color. I walked out of Le Jardin into the cool night air, leaving behind a room full of carefully constructed lies beginning to unravel. My phone buzzed, a message from my mother. Remember, sometimes the best revenge is letting them destroy themselves. I smiled, hailing a cab. The night wasn't over yet. The midnight deadline came and went. I sat in my parents' guest room, surrounded by documents and translations, when my laptop pinged with an email from Claire. Just 3 words: check the news. Breaking news headlines screamed across my screen. Callahan Veterinary Clinic under investigation. Below that, financial irregularities force immediate closure. My phone exploded with notifications. Missed calls from Ethan. Texts from Lydia, all caps and rage. A formal message from Thomas's lawyer requesting an urgent meeting. They'd called my bluff and raised the stakes. Now dozens of employees would lose their jobs, and countless animals would lose their care provider. All because I'd pushed too hard. I grabbed my keys, but my mother blocked the doorway. Where are you going? To fix this. My voice cracked. I never wanted to destroy everything. She took my keys. That's exactly what they're counting on. Your guilt. Your decency. A new text lit up my phone from Claire. Meeting. Your office. Now. I worked as a translator for an international law firm downtown. At 1 a.m., the building was desert quiet, but the lights in my office were on. Claire sat at my desk, looking perfectly composed despite the hour. Quite a mess you've made, she said, gesturing to the chair across from her. Me? You're the ones who shut down an essential business out of spite. No, Harper. We shut it down because we found evidence of embezzlement. She slid a file across the desk. In your name. My hand shook as I opened it. Transfer records, all technically legal, all tied to my ownership stake. All fabricated. This is impossible. I never. Of course you didn't. But Lydia did. Using your credentials, your passwords, your identity. Claire's smile was almost sympathetic. She's been planning this for months, waiting for you to make your move. The room spun slightly. Why are you telling me this? 'Cause unlike the others, I actually care about Ethan. And that clinic. She leaned forward. Sign over your shares, take the fall for the financial irregularities, and everything goes back to normal. The clinic reopens, no charges filed. And if I don't? Then tomorrow, Margaret releases evidence that you've been stealing from the clinic for years. Ethan's reputation stays clean, but yours? She shrugged. Well, good luck finding work as a translator with a fraud conviction. My phone buzzed again. Ethan, please, Harper. Whatever they're offering, take it. I can't watch you go to prison. He knows about this? My voice sounded distant, even to myself. He knows enough. Claire stood. You have 1 hour. Sign the papers, take the deal, or face the consequences. After she left, I sat in my dark office, staring at the city lights below. Everything I'd done to protect myself, to fight back, had only given them more ammunition. My mother's words echoed. Sometimes the best revenge is letting them destroy themselves. But what if they destroyed me first? My computer hummed to life as I logged into my work server. Years of translations, contracts, and documents scrolled past, including, buried in a folder from 3 years ago, the original Paris documents I'd translated for Claire's company. The ones that had started everything. I'd never read them carefully before. Had never needed to. But now, my hands flew across the keyboard, pulling up file after file. French contracts, German amendments, Italian addendums. A pattern emerged, one that made my breath catch. A new email arrived from Lydia. 1 hour left, dear sister. Tick-tock. I looked at the papers Claire wanted me to sign, then back at my screen. The truth that had been hiding in plain sight for years, wrapped in layers of languages and lies. My phone rang, Ethan again. This time, I answered. Don't sign anything, he said immediately. Harper, I remember Paris now. All of it. And I know what Claire. The line went dead. I stared at the phone, then at the documents, then at my computer screen with its web of international transactions and hidden truths. They'd pushed me to my lowest point, thinking I'd break. Instead, they'd pushed me right where I needed to be, at the bottom with nowhere to go but up. And up meant burning everything down. Callahan family gathered in Thomas's study, exactly where I knew they'd be. Margaret perched on the leather sofa, Lydia paced by the window, and Claire stood near Thomas's desk, all of them waiting for me to sign away everything. I walked in wearing the same red dress from Le Jardin, but this time carrying a thick folder. You're late, Lydia snapped. Where's Ethan? Probably still trying to get his phone working again, I said, watching Claire's expression flicker. Interesting timing for his service to cut out, right after he mentioned Paris. Thomas cleared his throat. The papers, Harper. Your hour is up. I placed my folder on his desk. You're right. It is. I pulled out a stack of documents, the original translations I'd done years ago before I even met Ethan. Let's talk about what really happened in Paris. Claire stepped forward. That's not relevant. It's all relevant. I spread out the papers. These contracts, written in French, German, and Italian, detail how Claire's company systematically stripped assets from failing veterinary clinics across Europe. Buy them out, gut them, sell off the pieces. Margaret waved her hand dismissively. Business is business. Except these clinics weren't failing naturally. They were sabotaged. By someone who created false financial records, just like the ones you're trying to pin on me now. Lydia's pacing stopped. You can't prove any of this. Actually, I can. 'Cause I was the one who translated the documents. I just never knew what they were for. Until now. I turned to Thomas. Did you know Claire's company is under investigation in 3 countries? That's why she needs the clinic, to hide money before the authorities freeze her assets. Enough! Claire's composure craquée. Sign the papers or go to jail. Those are your options. No, Ethan's voice came from the doorway. He looked disheveled but determined. Those aren't her options. Ethan, Margaret started, but he cut her off. I remember Paris now, Claire. You didn't just break my heart, you stole my original business plan. The one I showed you the night before you disappeared. He moved to stand beside me. The plan Harper found in your company's files, written in my handwriting, dated 3 years before you claimed it was yours. Claire's face went white. That's not de truth. I finished. Like how you've been using Lydia's gambling debts to manipulate her. Or how you convinced Margaret that I was trying to ruin the family name when you were the one destroying it. I did what I had to do, Claire said, her voice hard. This family needed saving from people like you. No, Thomas spoke finally, studying the documents on his desk. We needed saving from people like you. He pressed a button on his phone. Send them in. The study door opened again. 2 serious-looking men in suits entered, showing federal badges. Miss Bennett, one said, we'd like to ask you some questions about your company's international holdings. Everything happened quickly after that. Claire's arrest. Lydia's breakdown, confessing everything. Margaret's shocked silence as her perfect world crumbled. Through it all, Ethan held my hand. I'm so sorry, he whispered as we watched the agents lead Claire away. I should have seen it sooner. Should have stood up to them. We both should have seen a lot of things, I said, squeezing his hand. But we see each other now. Thomas approached us, looking older than I'd ever seen him. The clinic, he said gruffly. It needs to reopen. People depend on it. He held out a pen. Sign these. The real ones this time. Papers transferred full ownership to Ethan and me. No strings, no hidden clauses. Why? I asked. Because sometimes, he glanced at Margaret, still sitting shell-shocked on the sofa, family isn't about control. It's about trust. He turned to Ethan. Something I forgot a long time ago. Lydia stood alone by the window, watching Claire's car disappear down the driveway. What happens now? Now, I said, taking the pen from Thomas, we rebuild. All of us. I signed the papers, then offered the pen to her. Starting with the truth. She took it with trembling fingers, and as she signed, I saw something I'd never seen before in her eyes, hope. Sighed, the sun was rising over the Callahan estate. A new day, a new beginning. Not everything was fixed, but at least now we were facing it together. And that was a truth worth fighting for. 6 months later, I stood in the newly renovated clinic, watching Ethan perform surgery through the observation window. His hands moved with confident precision, healing a German shepherd that had been hit by a car. The dog's owner, a young girl, waited anxiously in reception, just as I had waited through my own storm of uncertainty. Clinic had changed. We'd kept the Callahan name but reimagined everything else. The walls now displayed framed translations of healing words from different languages: courage, hope, renewal. A reminder of how we'd found our way back. He's good at putting things back together, Lydia said, appearing beside me. She looked different now, softer somehow, without the sharp edges of desperate ambition. Weekly therapy and a gambling addiction program had helped. So are you, I replied, noting the stack of account books in her arms. She'd insisted on working here, doing honest books this time, paying her debt to the family one balanced ledger at a time. The surgery light clicked off. Success. My phone buzzed, a text from Margaret. Dinner tonight? I found your mother's recipe for coq au vin. These new Friday dinners were different from the old ones. No more power plays or hidden agendas, just careful steps toward understanding. Thomas had retired, letting Ethan run the clinic his own way. Margaret was learning to love without controlling, though old habits died hard. Mail came, Lydia said, handing me an envelope. The return address was a federal prison. Claire's letter was short. I never meant for it to go so far. Paris was supposed to be the beginning of something beautiful, not the start of a lie. Maybe that's what happens when we try to force life into the shape we think it should be, instead of letting it be what it is. Take care of him. Take care of all of them. I folded the letter and slipped it into my pocket, next to the ultrasound picture I hadn't shown anyone yet. Some revelations needed perfect timing. Ethan emerged from surgery, still in his scrubs. The dog will be fine, he said, wrapping an arm around me. Just needed someone to believe in him. Like father, like future child? I whispered. His hand froze on my waist. Are you? I nodded, watching joy spread across his face, pure and untainted by anyone else's expectations. Lydia squealed and hugged us both, then quickly composed herself. I'll reschedule your afternoon appointments, she said, wiping her eyes as she hurried away. Later that night, as we walked home to our new house, modest but ours, Ethan stopped suddenly. I found something in the old clinic files, he said. A letter from my father to his father, written when Dad was my age. He wanted to be a teacher, did you know that? But his father convinced him that business was the only acceptable path. Is that why he let you keep the clinic? I think he finally realized that legacy isn't about controlling the future. It's about giving it room to grow. We reached our front door, but I paused before going in. The moon hung full and bright, like the night I'd found that first text message in French. Everything had changed since then, and nothing. Do you ever regret it? I asked. Choosing this life over the one they planned for you? Ethan touched my still flat stomach, his answer in the gentleness of his hands. I chose love, he said simply. Everything else just fell into place. Inside, I had translations waiting, honest work for honest pay. Tomorrow, we'd have dinner with both our families, all the sharp edges slowly smoothing into something new and real. And in 7 months, we'd add another chapter to our story. My mother had been right about revenge. Sometimes the best revenge isn't about destroying your enemies, but about building something so beautiful that their shadows can't touch it. I hung my red dress in the back of the closet. I wouldn't need it anymore, but I'd keep it, a reminder that sometimes you have to fight for your happy ending, even if the battle leaves a few scars. Some things, after all, are worth the price of admission.
I never expected my peaceful Tuesday morning to turn into the beginning of a domestic nightmare. But there I was, standing in my kitchen doorway, staring at my mother-in-law Gloria, who had somehow materialized at my breakfast table like an unwanted apparition. My name is Sawyer, and until that moment, I'd been living what I considered a pretty well-balanced life. Working from home as an accountant, raising 2 great kids, and maintaining a happy marriage, all without the constant physical presence of my mother-in-law. Sure, she lived a comfortable 3-hour drive away, which meant manageable weekend visits every couple of months. Perfect distance, if you ask me. I sold my house, Gloria announced, stirring sugar into her self-served coffee. She'd clearly helped herself to my kitchen before I'd even come downstairs. The market was too good to pass up. I gripped my empty coffee mug tighter, trying to process her words. You sold your house. When did this happen? Oh, just finalized yesterday. She waved her hand dismissively, as if selling her home of 30 years was as casual as changing her nail polish. I thought, why not surprise everyone? The kids will be so excited to have their grandmother around more often. The word around made my stomach drop. Around? What exactly do you mean by that, Gloria? Well, I'll be staying here while I figure out my next move. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Ethan always said I was welcome anytime. Of course he did. My dear husband, always trying to please everyone, especially his mother. I made a mental note to have a serious conversation with him later. Does Ethan know about this? I managed to ask, keeping my voice steady. Not yet. He's already left for work, hasn't he? I thought we could surprise him when he gets home. Gloria took another sip of her coffee, grimacing slightly. You know, dear, you really should try that premium coffee brand I recommended. This tastes rather commercial. Before I could respond, thundering footsteps announced the arrival of my kids. Jack, my 10-year-old, skidded into the kitchen first, his superhero pajamas rumpled from sleep. 8-year-old Ella followed close behind, her eyes widening at the sight of her grandmother. Grandma! They shouted in unison, rushing to hug her. My darlings! Gloria cooed, embracing them. How would you like having Grandma around more often? I watched their excited faces and felt my chest tighten. This wasn't just about me anymore. Gloria had cleverly ensured her announcement would have an audience. My children's genuine joy would make it nearly impossible to object to her presence without looking like the villain. Mom, can Grandma stay in my room? Ella asked, bouncing on her toes. Oh, sweetie, I brought my own things. They're in my car, Gloria interjected before I could answer. I thought the guest room would be perfect. It gets such lovely morning light. I stood there, coffee mug still empty, watching as Gloria masterfully took control of my household in less than 15 minutes. The guest room, my home office where I worked full-time, was apparently now her new bedroom. Kids, you need to get ready for school, I said, finally finding my voice. Go on up and get dressed. Don't forget to brush your teeth. As they rushed upstairs, Gloria began rummaging through my cabinets, pulling out pans. I thought I'd make the children a proper breakfast. Pop-Tarts aren't really suitable nutrition for growing minds, are they? I felt my jaw clench. The kids like their routine, Gloria. And I need to talk to you about. Oh, would you be a dear and help me bring in my luggage? She cut me off, already cracking eggs into a bowl. I packed light, just 14 boxes and 3 suitcases. For now. For now. Those 2 words echoed in my head like a death knell. As I watched her move around my kitchen like she owned it, I realized this wasn't just a visit. This was an invasion, and Gloria had just appointed herself supreme commander of my household. My phone buzzed, a text from Ethan. Running late tonight. Budget meeting. Love you. I stared at the message, then at Gloria humming as she scrambled eggs in my favorite pan. Something had to be done, and clearly, I would have to be the one to do it. Ethan didn't come home until after 9 that night. I'd spent the entire day watching Gloria systematically reorganize my kitchen, rearrange my living room furniture, and critique my parenting choices through carefully worded suggestions. By the time he walked through the door, I was ready to explode. "Mom!" Ethan stopped dead in his tracks, briefcase still in hand. "What are you doing here?" Gloria emerged from the kitchen, wearing the apron I'd received last Christmas. "Surprise! I made your favorite pot roast. Though I must say, Sawyer's oven runs a bit hot. We should really have that checked." I watched my husband's face cycle through confusion, joy, and finally, concern as he glanced my way. "This is unexpected. Why didn't you call first?" "Oh, you know me. I love surprises." Gloria bustled over to hug him. "And wait until you hear my wonderful news." While Gloria launched into her practice speech about selling her house, I retreated to our bedroom. 10 minutes later, Ethan found me sitting on our bed, staring at my laptop screen where my work documents were still open. "So," he started loosening his tie. "This is something." "Something." I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Your mother has commandeered my home office, criticized every parenting decision I've made in the last decade, and informed the kids they'll be starting music lessons next week. But sure, let's call it something." Ethan sat beside me, his shoulder touching mine. "She means well." "Does she?" I turned to face him. Because earlier today, she told Jack that 10 is too old for superhero comics and that he should be reading classics instead. He was in tears. "Mom can be traditional," Ethan hedged. "Traditional?" I stood up, pacing the room. "She replaced all my cleaning supplies with vinegar solutions because apparently I've been poisoning our children with modern products. And don't even get me started on the lecture about screen time when she caught Ella playing her educational math game." A soft knock interrupted us. "Ethan, the pot roast is getting cold, dear." I watched my husband's shoulders tense. "We'll be right there, Mom." "You know I can't work with her here," I said quietly. "My clients expect privacy during video calls. I can't conduct business with your mother hovering around, commenting on everything." "It's temporary," Ethan assured me, but he wouldn't meet my eyes. "Just until she figures out her next move." The next morning, I woke to the sound of pots clanging in the kitchen. Gloria had apparently decided 6 a.m. was the perfect time to start making a proper breakfast. I found her whisking eggs while simultaneously lecturing Jack about his posture. "Grandmother knows best," she was saying. "When your father was your age, he sat up straight as a pin. Now look at you, hunched over like a little gargoyle." Jack caught my eye, silently pleading for rescue. Before I could intervene, Gloria spotted me. "Sawyer, dear, I've been meaning to talk to you about the children's schedules. All these after-school activities, soccer, art class, it's too much stimulation. In my experience as a teacher, children need structure, not chaos." "Their schedules are fine, Gloria," I said, pouring coffee into my travel mug. "They're happy and doing well in school." "Well, if you say so." Her tone suggested otherwise, though I noticed Ella's multiplication tables could use work. "I've already ordered some workbooks." I nearly dropped my mug. "You what?" "Just a few supplementary materials. Nothing excessive." She turned back to the stove. "Oh," and I took the liberty of signing them both up for piano lessons. "The teacher's an old colleague of mine. We start next Tuesday." I felt something snap inside me. "No, you didn't. I'm sorry. You don't get to make these decisions, Gloria. This isn't your household." The kitchen fell silent. Jack slipped away, leaving his half-eaten breakfast behind. Gloria slowly placed the whisk down, her back still turned to me. "I'm only trying to help, dear. Someone needs to think about the children's future." The implication hung in the air like poison gas. I grabbed my keys, my hands shaking. "I'm taking the kids to school," I announced. "When I get back, we need to talk about boundaries." Gloria's reply followed me down the hallway. "Of course, dear. Though in my experience, boundaries often limit a child's potential. Just look at how Ethan turned out under my guidance." I closed my eyes, counted to 10, and called the kids. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. After dropping the kids at school, I decided to work from my favorite coffee shop rather than return home to another round of Gloria's helpful suggestions. As I settled in with my laptop, a notification popped up from my bank. My heart nearly stopped when I saw the transaction details. Gloria had used Ethan's old credit card, the joint one he'd forgotten to cancel after getting a new one, to make several large purchases. Piano lessons weren't the only thing she'd been arranging behind our backs. My hands shook as I scrolled through the charges, private tutoring services, educational software subscriptions, and most alarming of all, a 5-figure deposit on a condo. In our neighborhood. My phone buzzed. Gloria's text read, "Dear, I noticed you left without properly clearing the breakfast dishes. I've rearranged your kitchen cabinets to a more logical system. Also, the children's new tutor starts tomorrow." I called Ethan immediately. "Your mother just spent $12,000 of our money." "What?" His voice cracked. "That's impossible. She doesn't have access to our accounts. Remember your old Capital One card? The one you kept as a backup? She must have found it in your desk." The silence on his end spoke volumes. "There's more," I continued. "She put a deposit down on a condo, 3 blocks from our house. Maybe this is good news?" Ethan's voice was hesitant. "If she has her own place. The deposit was made with our money, Ethan. Our money." When I finally returned home that afternoon, I found Gloria in my home office, surrounded by boxes of my work files. She'd cleared my desk completely, replacing my dual monitors with framed photos of herself with the kids. "Oh good, you're back," she said, not looking up from her organizing. "I hope you don't mind, but this room really wasn't being utilized properly. I've donated your old desk chair, terrible for posture. The new one I ordered should arrive tomorrow." "Gloria," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "we need to talk about the credit card charges." She waved dismissively. "Ethan always said I should treat this as my home too. And really, the children need proper guidance. That tutor comes highly recommended. You had no right." "I have every right," she cut in, her voice sharp. "I sold my house to be closer to my family. Everything I'm doing is for this family's benefit. Unlike some people, I think about the future." "What's that supposed to mean?" Gloria finally looked up, her expression eerily calm. "Well, dear, let's be honest. Working from home, letting the children play those violent video games, serving processed foods. These aren't exactly hallmarks of good parenting, are they?" Before I could respond, my phone chimed with an email. It was from my biggest client, canceling our afternoon video call because they'd received a concerning email about my professional setup being compromised. "Did you?" I stared at Gloria. "Did you contact my client?" I merely suggested that conducting business calls from a family home might not be the most professional arrangement. She smiled. "I'm sure they appreciated the heads up about privacy concerns." My vision blurred with anger. "You had no right to interfere with my work." "Oh, Sawyer," Gloria sighed, arranging another photo frame on my former desk. "I know change is difficult, but you'll thank me later. Now, about the children's new schedule. Get out." The words came out barely above a whisper. "Ibe your pardon." "Get out of my office. Now." Gloria's face hardened. "I've raised a child. I've taught hundreds more. I think I know what's best." "What's best?" I laughed, a harsh sound that surprised even me. "You want to know what's best? Not undermining my career. Not stealing our money. Not trying to take over my children's lives. I see Ethan was right about your tendency toward hysteria," Gloria said quietly. "We'll discuss this later when you're more rational. Oh, and dear? The condo I put a deposit on? It's not just an investment. Consider it my permanent residence. We're going to be seeing a lot more of each other." She brushed past me, leaving behind the scent of her perfume and the crushing realization that this wasn't a temporary invasion. This was just the beginning of her takeover plan. My phone buzzed again, another client rescheduling. As I watched my professional life unravel in real time, I knew something had to give. And soon, Jack's scream echoed through the house, sending me running upstairs. I found him in his room, frantically pulling books from his shelves while Gloria stood by the doorway, arms crossed. "My comics." His voice cracked as he turned to me, tears streaming down his face. "They're gone. All of them. I took care of those inappropriate materials," Gloria announced, her tone suggesting she'd done us all a favor. "A growing boy needs proper literature. I've replaced them with some classic novels, the kind your father read at his age." I stared at the pile of leather-bound books on Jack's desk, then at my son's devastated face. Those comics weren't just entertainment, they were his prized possessions. Some were rare editions Ethan and I had tracked down for his birthday, others were gifts from friends. They represented years of collecting. "Where are they, Gloria?" "The garbage collectors came this morning." She smiled, pleased with herself. "I must say, it feels wonderful to finally address this issue. Those violent pictures were rotting his brain." Jack slumped onto his bed, shoulders shaking. I sat beside him, pulling him close while my mind raced through possibilities. Thursday pickup meant the truck was probably still in the neighborhood. "Get your shoes on," I told Jack. "We're going comic hunting." Gloria stepped into the room. Now, Sawyer, don't undermine my authority. Jack needs to learn. Your authority? I stood up slowly. You have no authority here. None. I am his grandmother, who just threw away hundreds of dollars worth of his personal property without permission. I grabbed my keys. Jack's shoes. Now. We spent the next hour following the garbage truck's route, but it was too late. Jack's collection was gone, buried somewhere in the back of a compactor headed for the landfill. When we returned home, I found Ella hiding in the garden, her small hands covered in dirt. Grandma said I can't plant flowers anymore, she whispered. She says it's unladylike and I'll ruin my hands. Something snapped inside me. I marched into the house, finding Gloria rearranging my living room furniture again. We need to talk, I said. About Jack's improvement plan? I've already enrolled him in Latin classes. Much more suitable than those cartoon books. About you leaving. Gloria froze, then slowly turned to face me. I see what's happening here. You feel threatened because the children are finally getting proper guidance. Ethan warned me about your insecurities. Excuse me. He confided in me, dear. About your resistance to traditional values, your modern parenting notions. She adjusted a picture frame with deliberate precision. He agrees the children need more structure. My phone buzzed, a text from Ethan. Mom called. Maybe we should let the kids try some of her suggestions? Keep the peace. I felt the walls closing in. Gloria had somehow managed to turn my own husband against me, using his lifelong pattern of seeking her approval to manipulate the situation. The children are fine, I said, my voice steady despite my racing heart. They were happy, well-adjusted, and thriving before you arrived. The only problem here is you. Well, Gloria's eyes narrowed. We'll see what Ethan thinks about that when he gets home. I've already invited the new tutor for dinner to discuss the children's deficiencies. She brushed past me, pausing at the doorway. Oh, and I took the liberty of canceling Ella's garden club. She'll be starting ballet instead. Much more appropriate for a young lady. I watched her disappear upstairs, probably to rearrange another room of my house. Through the window, I could see Jack sitting in the backyard, staring at the spot where he used to read his comics. Ella was still hiding among her flowers, likely wondering if they'd be the next things taken away. This wasn't just about me anymore. Gloria wasn't just trying to take over my home. She was systematically destroying everything that made my children unique, happy, and confident. And somehow, she'd managed to convince Ethan it was all for the best. I pulled out my phone and started searching. If Gloria wanted to play games, fine. But she wasn't the only one who could make plans. It was time to fight fire with fire, or in this case, something with 8 legs. I found Lila Torres's art studio tucked between a coffee shop and a vintage bookstore. The window display featured elaborate spider sculptures made from twisted metal and dark glass. Perfect. So let me get this straight, Lila said, twirling a purple-streaked lock of hair. You want me to transform your house into a spider-themed nightmare to drive out your mother-in-law? She has severe arachnophobia, I explained, watching Lila sketch quick designs. And she's destroying my family. Say no more. Lila's pencil moved faster. I've got an installation that'll make your place look like the set of Arachnophobia Meets Modern Art. When do we start? That evening, I convinced Gloria to attend her church group's potluck dinner. As soon as she left, Lila arrived with her team. We had 4 hours. Mom's really afraid of spiders? Jack asked, helping unpack boxes of decorations. Terrified, Ethan confirmed, surprising me with his enthusiasm. Remember when she found that tiny spider in her garden and refused to go outside for a week? Ella looked up from the box she was exploring. Is this mean? I paused, her question hitting harder than expected. Sometimes, I said carefully, we have to be a little mean to protect what matters. Lila's team worked efficiently. Subtle spider web patterns appeared on the walls, nearly invisible until they caught the light. Delicate metal sculptures hung from corners, casting spindly shadows. The piece de resistance was the guest room, my former office, where an enormous abstract spider sculpture dominated the ceiling, its legs stretching down the walls. It's beautiful, Lila declared, stepping back to admire her work. In a creepy, unsettling way. We finished just as Gloria's car pulled into the driveway. The kids retreated to their rooms, and Ethan and I positioned ourselves in the kitchen, trying to act natural. Gloria burst through the door, clutching her casserole dish. That potluck was dreadful. Nobody appreciated my traditional recipes. Now, about tomorrow's schedule. She stopped mid-sentence, staring at the wall where the light had caught one of the web patterns. What is that? What's what? I asked innocently. Gloria stepped closer, squinting. Her face paled as she noticed more webs, then the subtle sculptures in the corners. Are those spiders? Oh, those. Ethan's voice was casual. Just some new art we picked up. Very modern. Gloria's hands began to shake. Take them down. Right now. But they're part of our new decor, I said. The artist spent hours installing them. Besides, they're not real spiders. I don't care what they are. Gloria's voice rose. This is completely inappropriate. I won't stay in a house with these. These things. Well, I said slowly, you could always move into that condo you put a deposit on. The one you bought with our money. Gloria's eyes narrowed. Ethan, are you going to let her speak to me this way? Actually, Mom, Ethan stepped forward. We need to talk about those credit card charges. This is ridiculous, Gloria sputtered. I'm going to my room. We followed her upstairs, watching as she opened the guest room door and froze. The massive spider sculpture loomed above, its shadows dancing in the evening light. Gloria screamed. Take it all down, she demanded, backing away. This instant. No, I said quietly. This is our house, Gloria. Our rules. Our choices. If you don't like it, you know where the door is. You planned this, she whispered, realization dawning. You're trying to drive me out. Like you tried to drive out everything that makes my children happy? I countered. Their comics? Their gardens? Their choices. Gloria turned to Ethan, tears welling up. You're choosing her over your own mother? I'm choosing my family, he replied. All of it, including boundaries. Gloria's face hardened. Fine, if that's how you want to play this. She pulled out her phone. I still have that condo deposit. And when the children realize what a mistake this is, they'll know where to find their grandmother. As she stormed out, I caught a glimpse of something in her expression. Not just anger, but fear. Fear of losing control, of being alone, of becoming irrelevant. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Then I remembered Jack's comics in the garbage, Ella's abandoned garden, and my determination hardened. Sometimes protecting your family means making difficult choices. And this was just the beginning. I thought Gloria's departure meant victory. I was wrong. The next morning, Child Protective Services showed up at our door. We received an anonymous report, the social worker said, flipping through her notes. Concerns about an unsafe home environment, psychological manipulation of minors, and... She paused, frowning. Disturbing decorative choices meant to inflict emotional distress? My stomach dropped as I invited her in. The spider installations, which had seemed like such a clever plan yesterday, now felt like evidence against us. I watched her take photos, noting every web pattern and shadow-casting sculpture. The children's grandmother provided extensive documentation, she continued, gesturing to a thick folder, including receipts for educational materials that were allegedly destroyed, records of canceled enrichment activities, and concerning text messages. Of course, Gloria had kept records. She'd been a teacher for 30 years. Documentation was second nature to her. My phone buzzed. Ethan, Mom's lawyer, called. She's suing for grandparents' rights and partial custody. Claims were unstable. The social worker interviewed Jack and Ella separately. Through the closed door, I heard Jack's voice crack as he described losing his comics. Ella talked about her garden, then burst into tears. Mrs. Bennett, the social worker said afterward, we have some concerns. This isn't what it looks like, I started, but she held up her hand. We have reports of you using psychological warfare against a family member, disrupting the children's educational progress, and creating an environment of hostility and fear. That's not. Your mother-in-law provided evidence of her attempts to enhance the children's education, while you appear to have deliberately triggered her documented medical condition to drive her away. A knock at the door interrupted us. Lila stood there, looking uncomfortable. Sorry, but I need to remove the installations. The invoice wasn't paid. I closed my eyes. Gloria had canceled the payment. Mrs. Bennett, the social worker continued, given the circumstances, we're recommending a temporary custody evaluation. The children will stay with their grandmother during this process. No, I whispered. You can't. Mom. Jack appeared in the doorway, his face pale. Grandma's here with police officers. I rushed to the front door. Gloria stood on our porch, flanked by 2 officers and a man in a suit I assumed was her lawyer. She'd traded her usual floral dress for a conservative business suit. This gives us temporary custody, the lawyer said, holding out papers. Given the documented psychological abuse and unsafe living conditions, the court agreed to an emergency order. Unsafe? I sputtered. You're the one who. Now, dear, Gloria cut in smoothly. Let's not make this more traumatic for the children than necessary. Jack, Ella, pack your overnight bags. Grandmother will help you get settled in the new condo. I watched, paralyzed, as my children were led away. Ella looked back once, tears streaming down her face. Jack wouldn't meet my eyes at all. This is what happens, Gloria murmured as she passed me. When you try to outsmart someone with decades of experience handling difficult situations. I taught middle school for 30 years, dear. Did you really think your little spider trick would work? After they left, I found Ethan sitting in Jack's room, holding one of his son's abandoned action figures. The lawyer says fighting this could take months, he said quietly. Mom's documented everything. Every conversation, every decision we made. She's painted us as unstable parents who used psychological torture against a vulnerable elderly woman. We were protecting our family, I said, but the words felt hollow. Were we? Ethan looked up, his eyes red. Because right now our kids are sleeping in another house, probably terrified and confused. And the worst part? Legally speaking, we gave Gloria everything she needed to take them. I sank down beside him, the action figure between us like a tiny plastic accusation. The spider decorations that had seemed so clever now felt childish, petty. We'd tried to fight manipulation with manipulation, and Gloria had turned our own weapon against us. My phone buzzed one last time, a message from Gloria. The children are settled in nicely. Jack's new Latin tutor starts tomorrow. Isn't it wonderful how everything worked out for the best? I stared at the message until the screen went dark, reflecting my own defeated expression back at me. We'd lost more than a battle with Gloria. We'd lost our children. 3 days after losing our children, Gloria called to say Jack had fallen ill. When we arrived at her condo, we found our son perfectly healthy, sitting at a desk covered in Latin worksheets. A small miscommunication, Gloria said, not even pretending to look apologetic. But since you're here, we should discuss the children's future. The condo was a museum of forced perfection. Classical music played softly in the background. Ella sat ramrod straight at a small table, practicing cursive. No dirt under her fingernails, no joy in her eyes. Jack, I said, keeping my voice steady, why don't you show your dad your room? Once they left, I turned to Gloria. Enough games. What do you want? Want? Gloria adjusted a perfectly positioned flower arrangement. I want what's best for my grandchildren. Structure. Discipline. Proper education. You mean control? I mean salvation from your permissive parenting. She smiled thinly. Though I am willing to negotiate visitation rights. Negotiate? I stepped closer. These are our children, not bargaining chips. Children who are finally thriving under proper guidance. Gloria gestured to Ella's perfect handwriting. No more comic books or dirt digging. Real achievements. Something in Ella's posture caught my attention. Her shoulders trembled slightly, her pencil pressing too hard against the paper. She wasn't practicing cursive, she was drawing tiny flowers in the margins, then quickly erasing them. Ella, sweetie, I said softly, what happened to your garden? Grandmother says ladies don't play in dirt, she whispered, not looking up. And Jack's new Latin tutor? I asked Gloria. How's that going? Excellent. He's finally learning something worthwhile. From down the hall came the sound of breaking glass, followed by Jack's voice. I hate this. I hate all of this. We rushed to find Jack standing amid the shattered remains of a crystal vase, tears streaming down his face. I don't want to learn Latin. I don't want to be proper. I want to go home. Now, Jack, Gloria started, but Ethan cut her off. Stop. Just stop, Mom. His voice was different, harder than I'd ever heard it. Look at them. Really look at what you're doing to your grandchildren. I'm giving them opportunities. You're crushing them, I interrupted. Like you tried to crush Ethan. But here's what you never understood. Our kids were already thriving. Jack's comics taught him creativity and moral courage. Ella's garden showed her how to nurture life and find beauty in small things. Sentimental nonsense, Gloria scoffed, but her voice wavered. Is it? I pulled out my phone, showing her Jack's last report card. Top marks in creative writing. His teacher said his superhero stories showed exceptional empathy and understanding of complex moral choices. Ethan joined in, displaying photos on his phone. Ella's science project on plant growth won first place. Her dirt digging taught her more about biology than any textbook. But Gloria's perfectly composed facade cracked slightly. But structure, discipline. Mom, Ethan said quietly, when was the last time you saw them smile? Really smile. Gloria looked at her grandchildren, really looked at them for the first time. Jack, surrounded by broken crystal, his worksheet crumpled in his fist. Ella, her perfect posture crumbling as silent tears fell onto her cursive practice. I just wanted, she whispered, then stopped. Wanted what? I asked, gentler now. To not be alone? To feel needed? There are better ways, Gloria. We're taking our children home, Ethan said firmly. You can fight us in court, drag this out for months. Or you can realize that love isn't about control. Gloria sank into a chair, her carefully constructed world crumbling like the shattered vase. I don't know how to be any other way. Then learn, I said. Not by controlling, but by understanding. Start by really seeing who your grandchildren are, not who you want them to be. Jack moved first, picking up a piece of broken crystal. I'm sorry about the vase, grandmother. I'm sorry about your comics, she replied, her voice barely audible. It wasn't a complete surrender, not yet. But as we gathered our children's things, I saw Gloria watching them with new eyes, seeing perhaps for the first time the damage that comes from trying to reshape someone else's joy into your own image of perfection. A month after the confrontation at Gloria's condo, I found a package on our doorstep. Inside was a collection of vintage superhero comics, first editions, carefully preserved. The note read simply, "For Jack." I was wrong. That evening, while the kids were doing homework, Gloria arrived for her first supervised visit. She stood awkwardly in our living room, clutching a gardening catalog. I thought, she said to Ella, we might look at some seeds for spring planting. If you're interested. Ella glanced at me before responding. I already started my tomatoes. But you could help with the peppers. The tension in the room softened slightly. Jack emerged from his room, one of the vintage comics in hand. This one's really good, grandmother. Want to hear about it? Gloria sat down, her usual perfect posture relaxing just a fraction. I would actually. I watched from the kitchen as Jack explained the complex moral dilemma facing his favorite hero. Gloria listened, really listened, asking questions that showed genuine interest rather than judgment. When Ella brought out her garden plans, Gloria didn't once mention dirty fingernails or unladylike behavior. Later, after the kids went to bed, Gloria lingered by the door. The condo sold, she said quietly. I'm moving to a smaller place. Still in town, but not so close. That's probably best, I replied. I found this while packing. She handed me a photograph. Ethan at 10 years old, reading a comic book, joy evident on his face. The last one I let him keep, before I decided he needed to grow up. I didn't understand then what I was taking away. I studied the photo, seeing echoes of Jack in young Ethan's expression. I was so afraid, Gloria continued, of becoming irrelevant, of being forgotten. I thought if I could shape them into my idea of success. She trailed off, shaking her head. You don't have to be perfect to be loved, Gloria. Neither do they. I'm learning that. Slowly. She straightened her jacket, a ghost of her old formality returning. I've enrolled in a gardening class. And a therapy group. For grandparents learning to let go. As she turned to leave, I remembered something. Wait here. I retrieved a small spider plant from my office. One of Ella's propagation projects. It's hardy, I said, holding it out. Thrives in most conditions. But it needs room to grow its own way. Gloria took the plant, understanding flickering across her face. Like children. Like all of us. After she left, I found Ethan in Jack's room, arranging the vintage comics on a new bookshelf. Mom called her lawyer, he said. She's dropping everything. No more custody battles, no more court dates. Good. I picked up one of the comics. Though I have to admit, I never expected vintage comics as a peace offering. She's trying, Ethan said softly. It's not perfect, but it's something. The next morning, I noticed new growth in Ella's garden. Tiny shoots breaking through the soil where she and Gloria had planted pepper seeds. Beside them stood a small sign in Gloria's precise handwriting. Growth takes time. Love takes patience. I thought about the spider decorations, still packed away in our garage. Our attempt at revenge had backfired spectacularly, yet somehow led us to a better resolution than I'd imagined possible. Not through forcing Gloria out, but by making her see what she was really losing. Jack's voice drifted from his room as he read his new comics. Ella hummed in her garden. From the kitchen came the sound of Ethan making breakfast. Normal sounds, ordinary moments. The very things Gloria had tried to perfect right out of existence. My phone buzzed with a text from Gloria. The spider plant looks lovely in my window. Though I prefer to think of it as a friendship plant now. I smiled, typing back. Growth takes time. Love takes patience. Sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. Sometimes it's showing someone a better way to love, messy, imperfect, and real. Like superhero comics and dirt under fingernails, like spider plants reaching for light in their own unique way. And sometimes, just sometimes, it's about learning to let go of the need for revenge altogether.
I should have known something was wrong the moment my mother-in-law offered us her house. Standing in her pristine living room, watching her perfectly manicured hands gesture at the crown molding and hardwood floors, I felt a familiar knot forming in my stomach. But desperation has a way of making you ignore your instincts. My name is Harper, and this is the story of how I lost everything to save my family. It just breaks my heart to see you and Ryan struggling with rent, Evelyn said, her voice dripping with concern that never quite reached her eyes. And sweet little Emma deserves a proper home, doesn't she? I watched my 5-year-old daughter twirl in the empty space, her blonde curls catching the afternoon light. Ryan stood by the bay window, hands in his pockets, wearing that boyish grin that still made my heart skip after 12 years together. "Mom, this is too much," he said, but I could hear the excitement in his voice. "The market value of this place." "Oh, hush," Evelyn waved him off. "What good is this big house doing me now? Besides, I'll be much happier in my condo by the lake. And this way, I can see my grandbaby whenever I want." There it was. The string attached to her generosity, wrapped so carefully in grandmother's love that refusing would make me look ungrateful. "We'd need to discuss the terms," I said, trying to keep my voice neutral. "The mortgage payments, maintenance costs." "Harper, darling," Evelyn cut in, placing her hand on my arm. Her grip was gentle but firm. "You're always so practical. It's admirable, really, how you manage with your... What do you call it? Digital consulting?" Ryan chuckled. "Mom, Harper's business is doing great. She just landed that startup account last month." Of course, Evelyn smiled. "Though I always thought a traditional job would be more stable. Especially with a young child." Before I could respond, Emma ran over, tugging at my sleeve. "Mommy, can I have the big room upstairs? The one with the window seat?" "We haven't decided anything yet, sweetie," I said, but Ryan was already nodding. "Of course you can, princess. That was my old room, you know. Mom, remember when I used to read comics up there for hours?" Evelyn's face softened as she looked at her son. "You were such a thoughtful boy. Always dreaming big dreams." I bit back a comment about how those big dreams had led to 3 failed business ventures and a mountain of debt I was still helping pay off. Instead, I watched them reminisce, feeling like an outsider in what would supposedly be my new home. "The papers are already drawn up," Evelyn announced, pulling a manila envelope from her designer handbag. "My lawyer made it very simple. You'll take over the mortgage payments, and I'll gift you the equity I've built up. It's the least I can do for my only son." Ryan's eyes lit up. "Mom, this is incredible. Harper, can you believe it? No more cramped apartment." I looked around the spacious room, trying to picture our furniture here, our photos on the walls. Our life transplanted into this museum of Ryan's childhood. But all I could see was Evelyn, dropping by unannounced, critiquing my parenting, undermining my decisions. "We should sleep on it," I suggested. "Make sure we understand all the implications." "Oh, there's no rush," Evelyn said smoothly. "Though I should mention, I've had other offers. And the market being what it is." Ryan turned to me, his expression a mixture of hope and pleading. Emma was still spinning, lost in dreams of her new room. I felt the walls of the trap closing in, lined with guilt and obligation and the desperate need to give my daughter a better life. "Where do we sign?" I heard myself say. As Evelyn produced a pen from her bag with triumphant efficiency, I caught a glimpse of something in her expression, not victory, exactly, but satisfaction. Like a spider watching its web do exactly what it was designed to do. I just didn't realize then that I wasn't the only one caught in it. It took exactly 3 weeks for the cracks to start showing. I was in our new kitchen, trying to concentrate on a client call, when Evelyn breezed in through the back door without knocking. Again. "Oh, are you still doing your little computer meetings?" she asked, loud enough that I had to mute myself. She began unloading grocery bags onto the counter, groceries we hadn't asked for, didn't need, and now would be obligated to thank her for. I wrapped up the call as quickly as I could, knowing from experience that ignoring her would only make things worse. "Evelyn, we've talked about this. I work from home. These calls are how I make my living." "Of course, dear. Though Ryan mentioned you might be looking for something more stable?" She arranged organic produce in the fridge with surgical precision. "My friend Margaret's daughter just started at that lovely accounting firm downtown. They're always looking for qualified people." The suggestion hung in the air like smoke. I gripped my coffee mug tighter. "My business is doing well. The Thompson account alone covered 3 months of mortgage payments." She closed the fridge door with a soft click. "Ryan says the payments are becoming a bit of a strain." My head snapped up. "What?" "He's worried about you, dear. All this pressure you put on yourself, trying to prove something. It's not healthy for Emma." Before I could respond, Ryan walked in, fresh from his morning run. He kissed his mother's cheek, then grabbed an apple from the counter. "Mom, you're a lifesaver. We were running low on groceries. We went shopping yesterday," I said. "Oh." He took a bite, looking genuinely confused. "Must have missed that." "You didn't miss it. You were there. You insisted on those expensive steaks that," I stopped, noticing the familiar glazed look in his eyes. The one that appeared whenever money came up. "Speaking of expenses," Evelyn chimed in, "I noticed the gardener hasn't been by. The roses are looking rather neglected." "We cancelled the gardener," I said. "We're trying to cut back on unnecessary." "But darling, proper maintenance is crucial for property value. You wouldn't want to let the house deteriorate, would you? After everything we've done to help?" Ryan nodded, mouth full of apple. "Mom's right, babe. We should reinstate the service." "With what money?" I demanded. "The same money that's supposedly making the mortgage payments a strain?" An uncomfortable silence fell. Ryan and Evelyn exchanged a look I couldn't quite read. "I think," Evelyn said carefully, "that if you're struggling so much with the basic upkeep, perhaps we should revisit the arrangement." "We're not struggling," I said. "We're budgeting." "There's a difference." "Of course there is, dear." Her smile was sympathetic in a way that made my skin crawl. "I just worry about Emma growing up in an environment of financial stress." "Mom's just trying to help," Ryan added, but he wouldn't meet my eyes. I looked between them, my husband and his mother, standing together against me in my own kitchen. No, not my kitchen. Her kitchen, with its custom cabinets and marble countertops that I was apparently failing to deserve. "I have another call," I said, gathering my laptop. As I left, I heard Evelyn's voice, soft but clear. "I hate seeing him worry like this. Perhaps if she'd consider a real job." I closed my office door and leaned against it, breathing deeply. Through the window, I could see Emma in the backyard, carefully arranging her dolls on the grass. She looked up and waved, and I forced a smile, waving back. My phone buzzed, a text from Ryan, "Mom's staying for dinner. Says she'll cook." Problem solved. I stared at the message, remembering the groceries I'd bought yesterday. Now probably relegated to the back of the fridge behind Evelyn's organic offerings. Another small battle lost in a war I was only beginning to understand I was fighting. My laptop pinged with an email notification. The Thompson account, they wanted to scale back their contract. "Family business," the message said. "Going in a different direction." I wondered, with a sudden chill, just how many of Margaret's friends worked with digital marketing firms. The notification from our joint bank account hit my phone at 3 a.m. I'd been lying awake anyway, listening to Ryan's steady breathing beside me, wondering when we'd stop talking about anything real. The screen's blue glow illuminated a transaction I didn't recognize, $12,000 to Investment Opportunity LLC. My stomach dropped. We didn't have $12,000 to invest in anything. I slipped out of bed and padded down to the kitchen with my laptop. The banking website revealed more surprises, a series of withdrawals over the past month, each one carefully sized to fly under my radar. Restaurant charges for places I'd never been to. A jewelry store purchase dated last Tuesday, when Ryan was supposedly at a business dinner. The sun was rising when I heard footsteps on the stairs. Ryan appeared in his workout clothes, then froze when he saw me at the kitchen table. "You're up early," he said, reaching for his water bottle. "Investment Opportunity LLC," I said. "Want to tell me about it?" He took a long drink before answering. "It's a tech startup. Mom's friend's son is the CEO. Ground floor opportunity. You took $12,000 from our account without talking to me. I was going to tell you when it paid off." He smiled, that boyish smile that used to make everything okay. "Come on, babe. You know I've got good instincts for these things." "Like the food truck venture? Or the cryptocurrency mining setup that nearly burned down our apartment?" His face hardened. "That's not fair. I'm trying to build something for our future." "Our future?" I pulled up the banking app. "What about these dinner charges? The jewelry store? You're tracking my spending now?" He ran a hand through his hair. "Real healthy, Harper. Real trusting." Before I could respond, the back door opened. Evelyn walked in, carrying a basket of fresh muffins. "Good morning, dears." "Oh, you look tired, Harper. Trouble sleeping?" "Mom," Ryan said, "can you give us a minute?" "Of course, darling." She set down the basket. "Though if you're discussing the investment opportunity, I think it's wonderful. So much better than relying on uncertain income streams." I stared at her. "You knew about this?" "I might have made the introduction," she said, smoothing her blouse. "Richard's such a brilliant young man. Harvard Business School, you know." "That money was for the mortgage," I said. "And Emma's school fees." "Oh, don't worry about that." Evelyn waved her hand. "I've already spoken to the school. They're happy to wait for payment, given our family's long association." The room spun slightly. "You spoke to Emma's school about our finances?" "Mom was trying to help," Ryan said. "Which is more than I can say." "Finish that sentence," I dared him. "Please." Emma's voice broke through the tension. "Mommy? Why is everyone yelling?" She stood in the doorway in her unicorn pajamas, clutching her stuffed rabbit. Evelyn immediately swooped in. "No one's yelling, sweetheart. Grandma brought muffins. Would you like one?" "Emma, go upstairs," I said. "I'll be up in a minute to help you dress for school." "But Grandma's muffins. Now, please." After she left, Ryan shook his head. "See? This is exactly why I didn't tell you about the investment. You're so rigid about everything." "Rigid?" I laughed, and it sounded strange even to me. "Is that what we're calling financial responsibility now?" Perhaps, Evelyn interjected, "if you're finding the household expenses so overwhelming, we should discuss alternative arrangements." "Alternative arrangements," I repeated. "You mean like the accounting job with Margaret's daughter? Or maybe I should just stay home entirely, let Ryan handle everything?" "That might be best for everyone," Evelyn said softly. "Especially Emma." I looked at Ryan, waiting for him to defend me. He studied his water bottle instead. I need to get Emma ready for school, I said, standing up. And then I need to call our bank. Harper, Ryan called after me, don't do anything rash. I paused at the stairs, not turning around. Rash would have been trusting you with our savings. Again. As I climbed the steps, I heard Evelyn's voice drift up, poor dear. The stress is clearly getting to her. You know, Margaret's daughter just started seeing the most wonderful therapist. I reached for my phone, hands shaking, and opened my banking app again. It was time to make some alternative arrangements of my own. The first thing I did after opening my new private bank account was call June Patterson. She'd lived next door to us in our old apartment building. And despite Evelyn's dismissal of her as that retired schoolteacher, she remained the wisest person I knew. Come over, she said immediately. I'll put the kettle on. June's small house felt like a sanctuary after the suffocating grandeur of Evelyn's, our home. Emma immediately curled up with June's ancient tabby cat while I sat at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around a mug of chamomile tea. I've been moving money, I admitted. Small amounts, whenever I can. It feels wrong. Wrong like stealing, or wrong like lying to yourself? June asked, sliding a plate of cookies toward Emma. Before I could answer, my phone buzzed. Another bank notification. I nearly dropped it when I saw the amount, $50,000, transferred out of our joint savings to something called Caldwell Family Trust. Honey, you've gone white as a sheet, June said. I showed her the screen. Her eyes narrowed behind her reading glasses. When did you say Ryan's new investment opportunity started? Last month, right after. I stopped, the pieces clicking into place. Right after Evelyn convinced us to take over the house payments. One cookie is enough, Emma sweetheart, June said, then turned back to me. And the mortgage payments? Have they actually been going through? My hands shook as I checked the account history. The last 3 mortgage payments had been reversed due to insufficient funds. Each time, a deposit from E. Caldwell had covered the difference, plus exactly enough for Ryan's investment contributions. She's funding his gambling habit, I whispered. Only this time she's calling it investing. And using your family's security as collateral, June added grimly. Question is, what are you going to do about it? My phone buzzed again, a text from Ryan, where are you? Mom's worried. Says Emma's missing piano lessons. Emma doesn't take piano lessons, I said out loud. Not yet, Emma piped up. Grandma says I start next week. She already bought the piano. I stared at my daughter, her face smeared with cookie crumbs and complete innocence. When did Grandma tell you this? Yesterday. She said Mommy's too busy with her computer to take me, so she'll do it instead. June reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Harper, listen to me carefully. This isn't just about money anymore. I know, I said, watching Emma pet the cat. They're trying to erase me. Piece by piece. Another text from Ryan, Mom says if you're feeling overwhelmed, she can take Emma for a few days. Give you time to rest. The room felt suddenly airless. June must have noticed because she sent Emma to play in the garden where we could see her through the window. I have about 15,000 saved, I said quietly. Not enough to start over, but... Stay here, June interrupted. The guest room's yours as long as you need it. I couldn't. You can and you will. Her voice took on the tone that had managed classrooms for 30 years. Besides, I've been meaning to tell you. Remember that startup I invested in last year? The one you helped me vet? I nodded. I'd spent weeks researching the company for her, making sure it wasn't another scam. They're going public next month. My financial advisor says my initial investment will multiply several times over. She smiled. I could use someone with your expertise to help manage things. Hope flickered, dangerous and fragile. Through the window, I watched Emma chasing butterflies in June's garden, free and happy in a way she hadn't been in months. My phone buzzed one more time. An email from our mortgage company, final notice of default. If I do this, I said, they'll never forgive me. June's face hardened. Honey, after what they're doing, forgiveness isn't what you should be worried about. I took a deep breath and opened my laptop. It was time to start documenting everything. The call from Emma's school came during a client meeting. I almost ignored it, but something made me excuse myself to answer. The nurse's voice was carefully neutral. Mrs. Caldwell, Emma's running a fever of 102. We've been trying to reach someone for the past hour. I'm her mother. I'm coming right now. I was already grabbing my keys. Who else did you call? Well, your mother-in-law is listed as the primary contact. She said she'd handle it, but... My heart stopped. But what? She hasn't arrived yet. And Emma's asking for you. I broke every speed limit getting to the school. Emma was curled up on the nurse's cot, her face flushed and hair damp with sweat. When she saw me, she burst into tears. Mommy, Grandma said she was coming, but... SHH, baby. I'm here now. I gathered her burning little body in my arms. Let's get you home. My phone rang, Evelyn. I let it go to voicemail. At home, I carried Emma upstairs to her room, past the gleaming baby grand piano that had appeared in our living room last week. As I tucked her in, she grabbed my hand. Don't go, she whispered. Stay with me like before. Like before? Before we moved here. When you didn't have so many meetings. The guilt hit me like a physical blow. I'd been so focused on documenting the financial manipulation, on building my escape fund, that I'd missed how all this was affecting Emma. My phone buzzed again. A text from Ryan, Mom says you're making a scene at school. She had it handled. I was typing a furious response when I heard the front door open. Evelyn's voice floated up the stairs. Hello? Where is everyone? Up here, I called back, keeping my voice low for Emma's sake. Where were you? Evelyn appeared in the doorway, immaculately dressed as always. I had a lunch appointment with the school board president. I couldn't just cancel. She pressed her hand to Emma's forehead. Oh dear, she is warm. I'll call my private pediatrician. I already gave her medicine, I said. She just needs rest. Well, I have that charity gala tonight, but I can cancel. No need. I'm staying home with her. But darling, you have that deadline. Ryan mentioned how behind you are on work. She smiled sympathetically. This is exactly why I've been saying. Get out. The words came out soft but sharp. I beg your pardon? Get out of my daughter's room. Get out of my house. My hands were shaking, but my voice was steady. You don't get to sweep in here and pretend you're the responsible one after leaving my sick child waiting for hours. Harper, she said, her voice taking on that familiar reasonable tone that made me feel crazy, I think you're overtired. Why don't you lie down? I can handle. Handle what? The mortgage payments you're manipulating? The investment scheme you're funding? Or maybe you'd like to handle my daughter's entire life while you're at it. Emma stirred fitfully. Evelyn's face hardened. I think we should continue this discussion downstairs. There's nothing to discuss. I sat on the edge of Emma's bed, taking her small hand in mine. I'm done letting you handle things. Consider carefully what you're saying, Evelyn said quietly. Ryan and Emma need stability. Structure. A proper family environment. Is that what you call this? Proper? She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. Do you really think you can manage on your own? With your uncertain income? The courts tend to favor stable home environments. The threat hung in the air between us. Through the haze of fury, I felt something shift inside me, the last thread of obligation snapping clean. You should leave now, I said. And take the piano with you. After she left, I held Emma while she slept, watching her fever gradually break. My phone kept buzzing, Ryan, Evelyn, probably the school board president by now. I ignored them all and opened my laptop one-handed. Subject, urgent meeting request. To Family Law Associates. I typed with my free hand while Emma slept against my shoulder, her breathing finally easy and regular. The weight of her trust felt like armor against whatever was coming next. It was time to stop documenting and start fighting back. Ryan came home at midnight, smelling of expensive scotch and his mother's influence. I was in Emma's room, packing her favorite clothes into a small suitcase while she slept at June's house, still recovering from her fever. What are you doing? He stood in the doorway, swaying slightly. What does it look like? I folded Emma's unicorn sweater, the one Evelyn always said was too childish. It looks like you're having another breakdown. He tried for his usual charming smile, but it came out wrong. Mom says you threatened her today. Your mother left our sick daughter alone at school for hours. She had a meeting. God, Harper, you're so. He ran his hands through his hair. Everything's always a conspiracy with you lately. The bank accounts, the investments, Mom's connections. The investments that emptied our savings? I zipped the suitcase. The connections that cost me 3 clients this month? What are you talking about? I pulled out my phone, showing him the emails. Suddenly, all my local clients are going with other consultants. Consultants recommended by your mother's friends. Funny coincidence, right? He barely glanced at the screen. Maybe they just found better options. More professional ones. The word hit like a slap. I pushed past him into our bedroom and pulled out my own packed bag from under the bed. Where are you going? June's. Emma's already there. His face darkened. You took our daughter to that old woman's house without telling me? That old woman was there when our daughter needed someone. Unlike her grandmother. Unlike her father. You're not thinking clearly. He stepped closer, using his height to loom over me. Mom's right, you need help. Professional help. We can find you someone. Stop. I backed away. Just stop pretending this is about my mental health. This is about control. Yours and Evelyn's. Everything we've done has been for this family. His voice rose, making me flinch. The house, the investments, Emma's future. Emma's future? I laughed, harsh and hollow. You mean the future where she learns it's okay for men to gamble away her security? Where she thinks it's normal for her grandmother to manipulate and isolate her mother? Don't be dramatic. I filed for divorce today. The words hung in the air between us. Ryan's face went through a series of expressions, shock, anger, and finally, something like pity. You can't afford a divorce, he said quietly. Mom's friends with every good lawyer in town. And with your unstable income, your emotional state. He spread his hands. Who do you think the courts will believe? My phone buzzed, a text from June, Emma's asking for you. Fever's back. I have to go, I said, grabbing my bag. Ryan blocked the doorway. You're not taking my daughter anywhere. Move. Or what? He smiled, and for the first time, I saw Evelyn in his expression. Face it, Harper. You've got nothing. No money, no connections, no proof of anything. Just paranoid accusations and a history of erratic behavior. How do you think that'll play in front of a judge? My hand tightened on my phone, where all my carefully gathered evidence was backed up. Emails, bank statements, recorded conversations, months of documentation that suddenly felt pathetically inadequate against the weight of Evelyn's influence. "Ryan," I said, my voice steadier than I felt, "if you don't move, I'm calling the police." "Go ahead." He pulled out his own phone. "I'll call Mom's friend at the station." "You remember Captain Mitchell? From the charity gala?" For a moment, I saw it all clearly, the long game they'd been playing, the web they'd woven while I was busy trying to prove individual lies. Every connection, every friendly introduction, every social obligation had been another strand, strengthening their control. My phone buzzed again. "Emma's crying for you." I looked at Ryan, really looked at him. The man I'd loved, the father of my child, now a stranger wearing familiar skin. "Okay," I said softly. "You win." His shoulders relaxed slightly. I took advantage of that moment to duck under his arm and run, my bag banging against my hip as I flew down the stairs. His shout followed me into the night, but I didn't stop. I had nothing left except the truth. And maybe, just maybe, that would have to be enough. The email arrived 3 days after we moved into June's guest room. I almost deleted it, thinking it was spam, but the subject line caught my eye: "Startup acquisition, urgent notice to early investors." My hands shook as I read it. The small tech company I'd helped June vet last year was being bought out. Her investment, the one I'd researched so carefully, afraid of her getting scammed, had just made her a millionaire. And she'd listed me as a 10% stakeholder. The doorbell rang before I could process what this meant. Through June's peephole, I saw Ryan on the porch, looking unusually disheveled. "Harper, please," he called through the door. "We need to talk. Mom's lawyer says." "My lawyer says I don't have to talk to you," I answered. "I know about the startup money." My blood ran cold. I opened the door but kept the chain on. "How?" "Mom has friends at the investment bank." His smile was desperate, familiar. "But this is good, right? We can fix everything now. Pay off the debts, start fresh." "We?" "I've been thinking about what you said. About Mom's influence, about my spending. You were right." He pressed his forehead against the doorframe. "I miss you. Emma needs her family together." For a moment, I wavered. Then I noticed the expensive watch on his wrist, new, definitely not in our budget. "Where's Evelyn?" I asked. "What does that matter?" "Ryan. Where is she?" He straightened up, dropping the vulnerable act. "Parking the car." "Of course." I closed the door just as another car pulled into June's driveway. Evelyn emerged, immaculate as always, carrying a thick, manila envelope. My phone buzzed. A text from June, who was out with Emma, called the lawyer. "Don't sign anything." The doorbell rang again. This time, I opened it fully and stepped onto the porch. Better to face them in the open. "Harper, darling." Evelyn's voice was honey-sweet. "We have a proposal that could solve everyone's problems." "You mean your problems?" I nodded at the envelope. "Let me guess, I sign over my startup shares, and in return, you'll make the divorce and custody battle easier?" "We're offering you a chance to repair your family," she said. "Think of Emma." "I am thinking of Emma. That's why I'm done letting you manipulate us." Ryan stepped closer. "Babe, don't be stubborn. Mom's trying to help." "Like she helped with the house?" I pulled out my phone, opened a recording app. "Tell me again how that worked." "The mortgage payments, the investments, the convenient reversals whenever you needed gambling money?" "That's ridiculous," Evelyn snapped, but Ryan's face had gone pale. You recorded us? Everything. I met Evelyn's eyes. Including your conversation with the school board president about sabotaging my clients. Interesting what people say when they think they're among friends. Evelyn's composure cracked, just slightly. No one will believe. The SEC might. I smiled. They're very interested in investment fraud. Especially when it involves manipulating property titles and bank records. You wouldn't dare, Ryan said. Think about what this would do to my reputation. Your reputation? I laughed. You mean the one your mother built while you gambled away our savings? That reputation? Harper. Evelyn's voice turned pleading. We're family. No, I said quietly. Family doesn't destroy each other. Family doesn't use a 5-year-old girl as a pawn in their power games. A car pulled into the driveway, June returning with Emma. I saw the moment Evelyn registered what was about to happen, saw her reaching for her perfect grandmother mask. Leave, I said. Now. Before Emma sees you and this gets messy. This isn't over, Ryan warned. Actually, it is. I held up my phone. Unless you want these recordings going public. Your choice. They left just as June's car door opened, Emma bouncing out with an ice cream cone. She ran up the porch steps, chocolate smeared on her chin, completely unaware of what had just happened. Mommy, look! June let me get sprinkles. I hugged her close, breathing in her sweet, innocent scent. Over her head, I watched Ryan and Evelyn's car disappear down the street. Sometimes the best revenge isn't about destroying your enemies. Sometimes it's about becoming strong enough that they can't destroy you. 6 months later, I stood in our new apartment, watching Emma arrange her stuffed animals on her window seat. The view wasn't as grand as Evelyn's house, but the sunrise filled the room with a warmth I'd forgotten could exist. The divorce had been surprisingly quick once the evidence came out. Ryan's gambling debts ran deeper than even I'd known. And Evelyn's carefully constructed social network crumbled when the SEC started asking questions. Last I heard, they'd moved to another state, somewhere their name didn't make people whisper at charity galas anymore. Mommy, look! Emma held up a letter. It came under the door. My heart skipped until I recognized Evelyn's elegant handwriting. For a moment, I considered throwing it away unopened. Instead, I sat beside Emma, who was already absorbed in her toys again. Dear Harper, the letter began. By the time you read this, Ryan and I will be settled in Arizona. He's agreed to treatment for his gambling addiction. Too late for your marriage, I know, but perhaps not too late for him to be the father Emma deserves. I find myself thinking about my own mother lately. How she controlled every aspect of my life until I married young to escape her. How I swore I'd never be like her. Then spent years becoming something worse, a woman so afraid of losing control that she destroyed what she most wanted to protect. The money from the house sale is in a trust for Emma's education. No strings attached this time. It's not an apology, those require forgiveness I haven't earned. Consider it a grandmother's attempt to finally do one thing right. Take care of our girl. She has your strength, thank God, not our weakness. Evelyn. A text buzzed on my phone, June, inviting us for Sunday dinner. Through the window, I could see her tending her garden, the startup money having changed nothing about her except the size of her flower beds. Emma, I said, want to help June plant those new roses she got? Can I wear my unicorn sweater? Of course. She ran to get changed, and I looked at the letter again. Part of me wanted to tear it up, to hold on to the anger that had protected us for so long. But Emma's laughter drifted from her room, free and unguarded, reminding me that sometimes the best revenge is simply living well. My phone buzzed again, a client notification. The business was thriving now, built on reputation rather than connections. Turns out, when you stop trying to please everyone else, you find your own strength. Ready. Emma bounced back in, wearing the sweater Evelyn had hated. June says she's teaching me about thorns today. What do you know about thorns, sweetie? She considered this seriously. They hurt if you grab them wrong. But if you're careful, they protect the pretty flowers. I tucked the letter away, smiling at my daughter's accidental wisdom. That's right. They're not good or bad, they're just doing their job. Like you do your job? Protecting me? Something like that. We crossed to June's yard, where the afternoon sun turned everything golden. Emma ran ahead, fearless and happy, while I carried Evelyn's letter in my pocket, not as a burden anymore, but as a reminder that the lines between love and control, protection and possession, are often thornier than we expect. June looked up from her roses, her hands dirty but her smile clean and true. Perfect timing. These beauties need a fresh start. Don't all of us? I said, kneeling beside her in the soil. Emma joined us, carefully touching a thornless spot on the stem. Can we plant them by the window? So we can see them grow? Of course, June said. Though you have to be patient. The strongest roots take time. I watched my daughter learn about nurturing things that can both hurt and protect you, about the patience needed for real growth. The anger that had driven me for so long settled into something quieter, not forgiveness exactly, but understanding. Sometimes the deepest wounds and the strongest healing come from the same place, family. The trick is learning which thorns to avoid, which to grasp carefully, and which to let go.
The call came at 3:47 a.m. I remember staring at my phone screen, wondering who would call at such an hour. The hospital's number flashed, sending a chill down my spine before I even answered. My name is Avery, and that call changed everything. Miss Callahan? This is Mercy General Hospital. We need you to come in immediately. Your parents have been in an accident. The drive to the hospital exists in my memory as fragments, red lights bleeding into darkness, windshield wipers fighting against unexpected rain. My hands shaking on the steering wheel. I kept telling myself they were fine, probably just some broken bones or a concussion. Parents don't just die on random Tuesday nights. Except sometimes they do. The impact was instantaneous, the doctor explained, his voice gentle but clinical. They wouldn't have suffered. I stood there in the fluorescent-lit hallway, still wearing my pajama pants and my father's old college sweatshirt, trying to process words that refused to make sense. A drunk driver had crossed the median. My parents' car had flipped 3 times. There was nothing anyone could have done. Would you like to see them? The doctor asked. I shook my head. I couldn't bear the thought of seeing them like that. I wanted to remember them as they were at Sunday dinner just 2 days ago, Mom laughing at Dad's terrible puns, Dad pretending to be offended when I sided with Mom about his new mustache looking ridiculous. A nurse handed me a plastic bag containing their personal effects. Mom's purse, Dad's wallet, their phones, and wedding rings. Such small things to represent entire lives. There's someone who'd like to speak with you, the nurse said, gesturing toward a man in an expensive-looking suit who'd been hovering nearby. He witnessed the accident and stayed to give a statement to the police. The man approached, his expression grave but kind. I'm Marcus Bennett, he said, extending his hand. I'm so sorry for your loss. I tried to help, but he trailed off, and I noticed his suit was stained with what looked like blood. I should have thanked him for trying to help, for staying, for caring enough to want to speak with me. Instead, I threw up in a nearby trash can. Marcus didn't flinch. He just produced a handkerchief from his pocket and offered it to me when I straightened up. Let me call someone for you, he said. Family? Friends? I wiped my mouth, shame mixing with grief. There's no one to call. My parents were it. The words hit me like a physical blow. They were it, I repeated, my voice breaking. Lucy, my best friend, would kill me for not calling her, but I couldn't bear the thought of anyone else's grief right now. I needed to hold myself together, and seeing Lucy break down would shatter what little control I had left. Then let me at least drive you home, Marcus offered. You shouldn't be alone right now, and you're in no condition to drive. I wanted to refuse, to maintain some semblance of independence in a moment when everything felt like it was slipping away. But the thought of getting back in my car, of driving through the same streets where my parents had just... I couldn't do it. Okay, I whispered, clutching the bag of their belongings to my chest. As we walked toward the hospital exit, I caught my reflection in a window, pale, hollow-eyed, lost. Behind me, Marcus's reflection watched me with an intensity one was too numb to question. I didn't know then that this night would set in motion events that would test every belief I had about love, family, and justice. I didn't know that Marcus Bennett would become both my salvation and my nightmare. I just knew that in that moment, I was 28 years old and suddenly, catastrophically alone. Or at least, that's what I thought. The first week after my parents' death passed in a blur of paperwork and phone calls. I sat at their kitchen table, surrounded by manila folders and sympathy casseroles, trying to make sense of insurance forms and funeral arrangements. That's when Marcus showed up again, carrying coffee and a leather briefcase. "I hope you don't mind," he said, setting a cup in front of me. "I remembered you take it with vanilla from the hospital cafeteria." I hadn't remembered telling him that. But grief does strange things to memory. "I'm a financial advisor," he explained, pulling out a chair. "I thought you might need help sorting through all this." Before I could respond, Lucy burst through the front door. She'd been checking on me daily, bringing food I couldn't eat and concern I couldn't handle. "Avery, why aren't you answering your..." She stopped short, eyeing Marcus. "Who's this?" I made introductions, watching Lucy's face shift from surprise to suspicion. Marcus stood, extending his hand with a warm smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "I was just offering to help Avery with the estate paperwork," he said. "It can be overwhelming, especially with life insurance claims." Lucy's eyebrows shot up. "And you just happened to stop by?" "Actually, I witnessed the accident," Marcus replied smoothly. "I've been concerned about Avery's well-being." The tension in the room thickened. Lucy crossed her arms, positioning herself between Marcus and me like a shield. "That's very thoughtful," she said, her tone suggesting it was anything but. "But Avery has people to help her." "Right, AV." I should have agreed with Lucy. Should have noticed how Marcus's jaw tightened at her words, how his fingers drummed once, sharply, against his briefcase. Instead, I heard myself say, "Actually, Lucy, I could use some professional help with this." Lucy's face fell. "Avery, it's just paperwork," I said quickly. "And Marcus knows what he's doing." "Of course he does," Lucy muttered, then louder, "Fine. But I'm staying." Marcus smiled again, all charm. The more the merrier. For the next few hours, Marcus guided me through the maze of documents with practiced ease. He knew exactly which forms needed attention first, which companies to call, what questions to ask. Lucy watched from the couch, her presence both comforting and somehow irritating. "Your parents had excellent life insurance," Marcus noted, reviewing a policy. "But there might be some issues with the payout timing. I could expedite that through my firm." "That would be..." I swallowed hard, remembering Mom's insistence on maintaining those policies. "That would be helpful." "Avery," Lucy interrupted, "can we talk?" "Privately?" In the kitchen, Lucy gripped my arms. "Something's off about him." "Why is he really here?" "He's helping, Lucy. He's inserting himself into your life when you're vulnerable. Don't you think it's convenient that he just happens to be a financial advisor?" I pulled away. Not everything is a conspiracy. Sometimes people are just kind. And sometimes they're not, Lucy shot back. "Have you even Googled him? Checked if he really works where he says he does?" I hadn't, and Lucy's question made me feel foolish. But before I could respond, Marcus appeared in the doorway. "Everything okay?" he asked, his concern seeming genuine. "I found something interesting in your father's investment portfolio. You might want to take a look." Lucy threw up her hands. "I need to get to work. Call me later, okay?" After she left, Marcus sat closer than before, his shoulder occasionally brushing mine as he explained various financial terms. The house felt different with just us there, quieter, more intimate. "You know," he said softly, "I lost my parents young too. Car accident, actually. That's why I stayed that night at the hospital. I couldn't bear the thought of anyone going through that alone. Something in his voice made me look up. Our eyes met, and for a moment I saw past his polished exterior to something raw and familiar, grief recognizing grief. "Thank you," I whispered, meaning it. Later, alone in bed, I checked my phone to find missed calls from Lucy and a text from Marcus. "Let me know if you need anything." Anytime. I should have heard the possessiveness in those words. Should have noticed how quickly he was becoming necessary. Instead, I saved his number and fell asleep clutching my phone, feeling less alone than I had in days. 3 months after my parents' death, Marcus proposed. We were in his penthouse apartment, the city lights twinkling below like fallen stars. It should have felt magical. Instead, I felt dizzy, unmoored. "It's too soon," I said, staring at the diamond ring that probably cost more than my parents' house. "Is it?" Marcus moved behind me, his hands on my shoulders. "You're drowning in that empty house, Avery. Let me take care of you." I closed my eyes, remembering Mom's voice. "Never let a man rush you into anything, sweetheart." But Mom was gone. And Marcus had been right about everything so far. The insurance money had come through faster with his help. The estate was settled. He'd even found a buyer for my parents' house who'd let me take my time moving out. "I need to think," I said. His fingers tightened slightly on my shoulders. "Of course. Take all the time you need." I called Lucy the next morning. She was already waiting at our usual coffee shop when I arrived. What? Lucy nearly knocked over her latte. "After 3 months? I know it seems fast, but..." "Fast? It's insane." Lucy leaned forward. "What do you even know about him?" "He's successful, kind, stable. Those are resume points, not reasons to marry someone." Lucy pulled out her phone. "Look at this." I did some digging. His first wife left him after 8 months. No explanation, just disappeared to another state. Changed her name. My stomach churned. People have complicated pasts. People have patterns. Lucy's voice softened. "You're grieving, AV. You're vulnerable. And he knows it." I left the coffee shop angry, at Lucy for doubting Marcus, at myself for letting her words plant seeds of doubt. When I got home, Marcus was waiting on my porch. "I thought you had meetings today," I said, fumbling with my keys. "Cancelled them. You're more important." He followed me inside. "Have you thought about my proposal?" I turned to face him, ready to say I needed more time. But something in his expression made me pause. For just a moment, his carefully maintained facade cracked, revealing something desperate underneath. "Yes," I heard myself say. "Yes, I'll marry you." His smile was brilliant, triumphant. "I'll take care of everything. We'll have the wedding next month, before winter sets in." "Next month?" My head spun. "That's 2. Perfect timing," he interrupted smoothly. "And you should move in right away. No sense paying to heat this big house alone." Within days, my life became a whirlwind of wedding plans and moving boxes. Marcus handled everything: the venue, the caterers, even my dress. "You have enough to worry about," he'd say, kissing my forehead whenever I tried to object. The night before the wedding, Lucy showed up at Marcus's penthouse where I was already half moved in. "Don't do this," she pleaded. "Something's wrong." "I can feel it." "You don't know him like I do," I said, but my voice wavered. "Neither do you." Lucy grabbed my hands. "Remember when we were kids, and you always knew when someone was lying? What does your gut tell you about Marcus?" Before I could answer, the front door opened. Marcus stood there, his expression pleasant, but his eyes cold. "Lucy," he said. "It's late. Avery needs her rest before tomorrow." I was just leaving. Lucy hugged me fiercely, whispering, "Call me if you need anything." "Anytime." After she left, Marcus pulled me close. "I know she means well, but Lucy needs to understand that things are different now. We're going to be a family." Family. The word echoed in my chest, filling the hollow space my parents' death had left. But as Marcus led me to bed, I caught our reflection in the window. He looked solid, certain. I looked like a ghost, fading at the edges. That night, I dreamed of my mother. She was trying to tell me something important, but her voice was drowned out by the sound of screeching tires and breaking glass. I woke up gasping, reaching for my phone to call Lucy. Marcus stirred beside me. "Everything okay, sweetheart?" I put the phone down. "Just wedding jitters." He pulled me closer, his arm heavy across my waist. "Don't worry. After tomorrow, everything will be perfect." I lay awake until dawn, wondering why perfect suddenly sounded so much like prison. The pregnancy test showed positive 2 months after the wedding. I stared at it in our marble bathroom, my hands shaking. This should have been a moment of pure joy, but my first instinct was to hide it from Marcus. I didn't understand why until that evening, watching him review our monthly expenses on his laptop. "You spent $400 at that boutique?" He didn't look up. "We talked about discretionary spending, Avery." "It was for work clothes," I said, touching my still flat stomach. "My others don't fit right anymore." Now he looked up, his eyes sharp. "Are you?" I nodded, forcing a smile. His reaction was everything it should have been: joy, excitement, immediate calls to his family. But something felt off, like watching a perfect performance where you can see the strings. The next morning, I found my credit cards cut up on the kitchen counter. "It's for the best," Marcus explained, sliding a new card across the granite. "Joint account only. We need to be more careful now that we're having a baby." I picked up the new card. My name was missing from it, just Marcus Bennett in raised letters. "I can't access my personal account anymore?" "Why would you need to?" His tone was gentle, reasonable. "I make more than enough for both of us. 3 of us now." The pregnancy progressed, and with it, Marcus's control tightened like a slowly turning screw. He hired a recommended doctor without consulting me, installed security cameras in every room of our home, started tracking my phone's location in case of emergency. I tried calling Lucy, but my calls kept going to voicemail. Finally, I got a text, number no longer in service. When I asked Marcus about it, he shrugged. "She probably changed carriers." You know how Lucy is, always changing her mind about things. Ethan was born on a stormy Tuesday. Marcus wasn't there. He had an unmissable meeting in Chicago. The nurse asked if I wanted to call someone else, and I realized I had no one left to call. Looking at my son's tiny face, something broke and reformed inside me. This perfect, innocent being depended on me completely, just like I now depended on Marcus. The thought hit me like ice water. When Marcus returned 3 days later, he had papers for me to sign. "Just some adjustments to our life insurance and investments," he said, bouncing Ethan with practiced efficiency, making sure everything's properly protected. I scanned the documents, my postpartum fog lifting enough to catch phrases like full financial control and medical proxy. "I should have my lawyer look at these," I said. Marcus's bounce hitched for just a second. "Don't you trust me, sweetheart? After everything I've done for us?" Ethan started crying, a sharp, desperate sound. Marcus handed him back to me with barely concealed irritation. "He's always crying," he said later that night, after I'd spent hours trying to soothe our colicky son. "Maybe we should hire a night nurse. Give you a break." "I don't want a break," I said, holding Ethan closer. "I want to be with my son." "Our son," Marcus corrected, his smile not reaching his eyes. "And I want what's best for both of you. You're clearly overwhelmed." I waited until he fell asleep before slipping into his home office. The papers were still there, along with others, bank statements showing massive transfers, documents about my parents' estate I'd never seen, and a folder labeled Jennifer Bennett, his first wife. Inside was a restraining order, police reports, hospital records. My hands trembled as I took photos with my phone, knowing I had minutes at most before Marcus's security system alerted him to movement in the office. Back in bed, Ethan sleeping against my chest, I felt Marcus stir beside me. "Everything okay?" he murmured. "Perfect," I lied, my heart pounding. "Just feeding the baby." He pulled me closer, his arm heavy across both me and Ethan. Possessive. Constraining. I lay awake until dawn, planning my escape, knowing I had to be smarter than Jennifer. Had to protect Ethan at all costs. But first, I needed to find Lucy. The breaking point came on Ethan's first birthday. Marcus had insisted on a lavish party, caterers, photographers, 50 guests I barely knew. I stood in our kitchen, watching him direct the staff like a general commanding troops, while Ethan cried in his high chair. "He needs his nap, Marcus," I said, reaching for our son. "He needs to learn to socialize properly." Marcus intercepted my movement, his fingers wrapping around my wrist. The Hendersons brought their board chairman. Appearances matter. I pulled away, the motion causing a stack of invitations to scatter across the floor. As I bent to pick them up, a familiar name caught my eye: Thompson. Lucy's parents were invited. Why are Tom and Sarah Thompson on the guest list? My voice shook. "You said Lucy moved away." Marcus's expression didn't change, but something cold flickered in his eyes. Did I? Must have been a misunderstanding. Like the misunderstanding about Jennifer? The words slipped out before I could stop them. The kitchen staff suddenly found urgent reasons to be elsewhere. "What did you say?" Marcus's voice was deadly quiet. "I found the restraining order," I said, my heart hammering. "The police reports." "What did you do to her, Marcus?" He laughed, a sound that made Ethan whimper. "You've been snooping in my office? That's disappointing, Avery. Very disappointing. Where's Lucy? What did you tell her to make her stay away?" "You should focus on our guests," he said, reaching for Ethan. "I'll take him upstairs." I stepped between them. "Don't touch him. He's my son." "Is he?" "Because the paperwork I found shows you changed his birth certificate. Removed my name as mother." Marcus's mask slipped completely. "You really shouldn't have gone through those files." "Or what?" "You'll make me disappear like Jennifer." The slap came fast, but I was expecting it. What I wasn't expecting was the phone that clattered from his jacket pocket, my old phone, the one he'd said was accidentally destroyed months ago. We both stared at it. "Quite a collection of texts from Lucy on there," I said, my cheek burning. "Warnings about you. Offers to help me leave. Funny how I never got them." Marcus moved with frightening speed, but I was faster. I grabbed Ethan and backed toward the door. "Think carefully about what you're doing," he said. "You have no money, no family, nowhere to go." I made sure of that. "You made one mistake," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. "You let me find those documents about Jennifer. About what you really did with my parents' estate." His face went white. "You don't understand." "I understand enough." I held Ethan tighter. "And so will the police when they see what I sent to my lawyer last week." "You're bluffing. You don't have a lawyer." "Jennifer's lawyer," I corrected. She was very interested in the pattern. The doorbell rang, the first guests arriving. Marcus's carefully constructed facade snapped back into place. "We'll discuss this later," he said, straightening his tie. "Don't make a scene." "No," I said, "we won't." I walked out the front door, past the arriving guests, ignoring their startled looks and Marcus's smooth excuses about my emotional state. I kept walking until I reached the park 3 blocks away, where a familiar figure sat on a bench. "Took you long enough," Lucy said, standing up. "I've been waiting here every day for weeks, hoping you'd figure it out. You never left." "Of course not." She hugged me carefully, mindful of Ethan. "But he had to think I did. Had to think you were completely isolated." "We need to go," I said, looking back toward the house. "He'll come after us." "Let him try." Lucy led me to her car. "Your grandmother Eleanor is waiting. Turns out she's been looking for you since your parents died." Marcus intercepted those calls too. As we drove away, I saw Marcus running down the street in his expensive suit, his mask completely gone. In the rearview mirror, he looked smaller, less powerful. "He'll never stop," I said. "No," Lucy agreed. "But neither will we." Ethan fell asleep in my arms, peaceful for the first time in months. I held him close, knowing the fight ahead would be brutal, but feeling stronger than I had since that first hospital call. Sometimes you have to lose everything to find what you're really made of. Eleanor's Victorian mansion loomed against the stormy sky like something from a Gothic novel. Lucy pulled into the gravel driveway, and I felt a strange mix of fear and hope. This was my father's childhood home, the place he'd refused to discuss. "She's been waiting for you," Lucy said, killing the engine. Before we reached the porch, the front door swung open. Eleanor Callahan stood there, tall and elegant despite her age, her silver hair pulled back in a severe bun. "So," she said, eyeing me critically, "you finally figured it out." The first few days at Eleanor's were a blur of lawyers, police reports, and sleepless nights. Marcus's threats came hourly: texts, emails, calls from blocked numbers, each one more desperate than the last. "He's filed for emergency custody," my lawyer said over speakerphone. "Claims you're mentally unstable, a danger to Ethan." Eleanor snorted from her armchair. Of course he did. Men like that always play the same cards. "He's frozen all the accounts," I said. "Even the trust fund from my parents." "That's illegal," Lucy interjected. "The estate money was transferred months ago," I finished. "He had me sign everything over while I was still in the hospital after Ethan's birth." The lawyer's sigh crackled through the speaker. "We'll fight it, but these cases take time. And money." That night, I found Eleanor in her study, surrounded by old photographs. "Your father was wrong about me," she said without looking up. "Just like he was wrong about your mother's accident." My heart stopped. "What?" "Marcus isn't the first man to arrange convenient accidents." She handed me a yellowed newspaper clipping. "Your grandfather was very good at making things look unintentional." I scanned the article. A car crash from 30 years ago. My grandmother's sister, dead after her brakes mysteriously failed. "Dad thought you abandoned them," I whispered. "I was protecting them. Just like you're protecting Ethan now." Eleanor's eyes were sharp. "But protection isn't enough. Sometimes you have to fight back." A crash from upstairs cut through the tension. Lucy's scream followed. "Avery!" I ran up the stairs 2 at a time. Ethan's room was empty, the window open to the storm. On his bed lay his favorite stuffed bear, its head torn off. "The cameras caught him," Lucy said, tablet in hand. "Marcus." He was gone before the alarm triggered. My legs gave out. Eleanor caught me before I hit the floor. "He's showing you what he can do," she said. "What he'll take if you don't go back." My phone buzzed, a video message from Marcus. Ethan's bear wasn't the only thing he'd taken. The screen showed papers scattered across his desk, medical records, school reports, photos of me at college parties. "Come home," his voice purred, "or everyone sees who you really are. Including the judge. How do you think they'll view a mother with your history?" "He's bluffing," Lucy said, but her voice shook. "No," I replied, "he's winning." Eleanor's hand gripped my shoulder. "Only if you let him." "I have nothing left." The words tore from my throat. "No money, no proof, no power. He's taken everything." "Not everything." Eleanor moved to an old painting on the wall, swung it aside to reveal a safe. "Your grandfather taught me one thing: always keep evidence." She pulled out a thick folder. Inside were documents, photos, bank statements, 30 years of carefully gathered proof of financial fraud and worse. "Marcus isn't just fighting you," she said. "He's fighting a ghost who taught me everything about men like him. And ghosts don't play fair." My phone buzzed again. "Marcus, you have 1 hour to decide. After that, everything burns." I looked at the folder in my hands, at Lucy's determined face, at Eleanor's knowing smile. Something cold and certain settled in my chest. "Tell him I'm coming home," I said, reaching for my coat. "But first, we need to make a stop." "Where?" Lucy asked. "To see Jennifer Bennett. It's time to compare notes." The storm outside grew stronger, but for the first time since leaving Marcus, I felt steady. Sometimes rock bottom isn't an ending. Sometimes it's just the foundation you need to build something stronger. Jennifer Bennett lived in a small apartment above a bookstore 2 states away. Her hair was different, her name was changed, but her eyes held the same haunted look I saw in my mirror every morning. "I wondered when you'd find me," she said, letting us in. We spread Eleanor's documents across Jennifer's kitchen table, 3 decades of carefully documented fraud, abuse, and manipulation. Jennifer added her own files, and slowly, a pattern emerged. "The accident that killed your parents," Jennifer said quietly. "It wasn't the first one Marcus arranged." My phone buzzed. "Marcus, 20 minutes left, sweetheart. Clock's ticking." I texted back, "Coming home. Meet me at the house." Lucy grabbed my arm. You can't go back there. Watch me. I turned to Jennifer. Are you ready? She nodded, her hands shaking but her voice steady. Been ready for 3 years. The drive back felt like moving through a dream. Eleanor's evidence was already with the FBI. Jennifer's testimony was recorded and safe. Everything was in place. Marcus was waiting in our living room, Ethan's torn bare on the coffee table between us. I knew you'd make the right choice, he said, reaching for me. I stepped back. Where's Ethan? Safe. With my sister. His smile turned cold. Where he'll stay until you prove you can be trusted. Like Jennifer proved herself? I watched his face change. Or like my parents proved themselves? Careful, Avery. He moved toward me, but I held my ground. You're emotional. Not thinking clearly. Actually, I'm thinking clearly for the first time since that night at the hospital. I pulled out my phone, showed him the screen. Remember this night, Marcus? The security footage played silently, Marcus arguing with my father outside their house, following their car, making a call moments before the crash. Where did you get that? His mask slipped completely. Eleanor had cameras installed after her sister died the same way. Funny how history repeats itself. You can't prove anything. No. I nodded toward the window. Red and blue lights flashed outside. Jennifer's testimony might help. And the FBI seems very interested in those offshore accounts you set up with my parents' money. Marcus lunged for me, but Lucy appeared in the doorway, Jennifer behind her. His eyes darted between us, calculating. Everything I did was for us, he said. To protect our family. No. My voice was ice. Everything you did was for control. But you made one mistake. What's that? You thought I was weak. Like Jennifer. Like my mother. I stepped closer. But I'm not them. I'm Eleanor's granddaughter. And she taught me how to fight back. The FBI agents burst in before Marcus could respond. As they read him his rights, he kept his eyes locked on mine. You'll regret this, he hissed. You're nothing without me. I picked up Ethan's bear, carefully reattaching its head. No, Marcus. I was nothing with you. That was the point. Later, at Eleanor's house, I held Ethan close, watching him sleep. Lucy brought coffee, Jennifer brought blankets, and Eleanor brought perspective. Your father never knew the truth about his mother, she said, showing me an old letter. Your grandfather convinced him I abandoned them. By the time I gathered enough evidence to fight back, it was too late. The damage was done. But not this time, I said. No. Eleanor smiled. Not this time. My phone buzzed one last time, Marcus's lawyer, offering a deal. Delete the evidence, recant the testimony, and he'd give me full custody of Ethan. I showed the message to Jennifer. She took my phone and typed 2 words, not interested. Outside, the storm finally broke. Through the window, I could see stars emerging, bright and clear against the dark sky. Ethan stirred in my arms, safe and whole. Sometimes the best revenge isn't about destroying your enemy. Sometimes it's about rebuilding everything they tried to break, stronger, better, and far beyond their reach. Marcus had taught me about power, but Eleanor, Lucy, and Jennifer had taught me about strength. And in the end, that made all the difference. 1 year later, I stood in Eleanor's attic, surrounded by antique furniture waiting to be restored. Sunlight streamed through the dormer windows, catching dust motes and memories alike. My workshop had become my sanctuary, each piece of furniture a story waiting to be renewed. The news about Marcus came during breakfast. Lucy burst in, waving her phone. Guilty on all counts, she announced. 15 years minimum. Eleanor looked up from feeding Ethan his oatmeal. Good. Though prison's too comfortable for men like him. I kept sanding the Victorian desk I was restoring, letting the rhythmic motion calm my racing heart. Did he say anything? Tried to blame everyone else. The judge wasn't buying it. Lucy sat beside Ethan, wiping oatmeal from his chin. Jennifer sends her thanks, by the way. She's finally using her real name again. The doorbell rang, another customer for our growing restoration business. Eleanor's attic treasures had become the foundation of something unexpected, independence. Mrs. Peterson's hear about her grandmother's cabinet, Eleanor called up the stairs. Coming. I set down my sandpaper, studying my work. The desk had arrived badly damaged, its surface scarred and watermarked. Now the original would gleam through, waiting for its final polish. As I descended the stairs, I caught sight of myself in the hallway mirror. I looked different, stronger, steadier. My father's eyes looked back at me, and for the first time, I understood him better. Sometimes the hardest patterns to break are the ones we inherit. The afternoon brought another visitor, Marcus's sister, Catherine. She stood awkwardly on the porch, clutching a familiar teddy bear. "Found this while cleaning out his place," she said. "Thought Ethan might want it back." I took the bear, now professionally repaired. "Thank you." "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I should have seen what he was doing. Should have stopped him." "We all should have seen something," I replied. The question is what we do after we finally open our eyes. Later, as sunset painted Eleanor's garden in gold, we gathered for our weekly family dinner. Lucy brought wine, Jennifer drove down from her new home 2 towns over, and Eleanor presided over it all like a benevolent queen. To justice, Lucy proposed, raising her glass. To survival, Jennifer added. To family, Eleanor corrected, watching Ethan play with his restored bear. The kind we choose, not the kind that chains us. I touched the letter in my pocket, the one that had explained everything about Eleanor and my father. Their estrangement had been built on lies, just like Marcus's power over me. But unlike my father, I'd gotten the chance to learn the truth in time. "I have news," I announced. "The restoration business is expanding. We've been asked to handle the renovation of the Historical Society's entire collection." "That's wonderful," Lucy exclaimed, but Eleanor's eyes narrowed. "And," she prompted, "and I've decided to go back to school. Part-time for now. Art conservation and restoration." Eleanor smiled, satisfaction gleaming in her eyes. "Good. About time you started building something for yourself." Speaking of building, Jennifer added, "My support group for survivors wants you to come speak next month. Share your story." I hesitated, thinking of all the women out there still trapped in their own versions of my story. "Yes," I said finally. "I'll come." As night fell, I tucked Ethan into bed in what had been my father's childhood room. The walls still held old photographs, Eleanor's careful documentation of a life interrupted. But now new pictures hung alongside them, Ethan's first steps, Lucy's birthday party, Jennifer's art show opening. My phone buzzed, a message from Marcus's lawyer. Another appeal, another attempt to rewrite history. I deleted it without reading it. Some scars don't fade completely. Some restorations leave traces of damage behind. But as I stood in my workshop the next morning, running my hands over smooth wood and honest repairs, I realized something important. Sometimes the most beautiful pieces are the ones that show where they've been broken and carefully, lovingly put back together. Not perfect, but stronger for the mending.
I never thought I'd be the one to discover my mom was dying. Not like that, anyway. Not by accidentally walking in on my parents having what they thought was a private conversation in our kitchen at midnight. My name is Ella, and until that night 3 months ago, I was just your average 17-year-old whose biggest worry was whether I'd get into the archaeology program at University of Chicago. Now? Well, now everything's different. I remember exactly how the linoleum felt under my bare feet as I crept downstairs for a glass of water. The house was dark except for the soft glow coming from the kitchen. I heard my dad's voice first, low and strained in a way I'd never heard before. "We have to tell her, Sarah. The treatments aren't working anymore." "Not yet," my mom whispered back. "Please, Mark. She has her college applications to focus on. Her whole future ahead of her." I froze on the last step, my hand gripping the banister so tight my knuckles turned white. "Sarah, she's going to notice something's wrong eventually. The doctors said 3 months, maybe 4. Stop." Mom's voice cracked. "Just stop." I must have made some sort of sound because they both went quiet. Then Mom's chair scraped against the floor and I panicked, practically running back upstairs. I shut my bedroom door as quietly as I could and slid down against it, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. The next morning, I watched Mom make breakfast like nothing was wrong. She hummed while flipping pancakes, her favorite apron tied around her waist. But now I noticed things I hadn't before. How loose the apron had become, the slight tremor in her hands as she poured coffee, the way she leaned against the counter when she thought no one was looking. "Everything okay, sweetie?" she asked, catching me staring. "You've barely touched your breakfast." I forced a smile. "Yeah, just nervous about that history test today." Dad looked up from his newspaper, and for a second our eyes met. There was something there, guilt maybe, or fear. He quickly looked away. "Well, you've always been great at history," Mom said, reaching over to squeeze my hand. "It's in your blood. Your grandfather was an amazing historian, you know." "I know, Mom. You've told me about 1,000,000 times." I tried to keep my voice light, but my throat felt tight. Later that day, I sat in the school library during lunch, trying to focus on my archaeology textbook, but instead finding myself looking up cancer symptoms on my phone. Mrs. Green, the librarian, must have noticed something was off because she brought me a cup of tea without saying a word. My best friend Maya dropped into the chair across from me. "Okay, Spill. You've been weird all day." I closed my phone quickly. "It's nothing." "Ball," she said, but didn't push further. That's what I love about Maya. She knows when to back off. The rest of the day passed in a blur. When I got home, Mom was asleep on the couch, a blanket pulled up to her chin. I stood there watching her breathe, counting the rises and falls of her chest. She looked so small suddenly, so fragile. Dad came up behind me, putting his hand on my shoulder. "Let her rest," he said softly. I turned to look at him, and the words were right there on the tip of my tongue. But something in his expression stopped me. He looked lost, scared even. In that moment, I realized that maybe he needed to pretend everything was okay just as much as Mom did. So I nodded and went upstairs to my room, where I pulled out my college applications. The University of Chicago's deadline was coming up, and Mom was right. I had my whole future ahead of me. I just didn't know how much of that future would include her. Changes in Mom happened so fast after that night. Felt like watching a time-lapse video where everything speeds up except you're stuck moving at normal speed. 2 weeks after I overheard their conversation, she couldn't even make it up the stairs without Dad's help. I was sitting at the kitchen table, pretending to study while actually watching them through the doorway. Mom's hand gripped the railing, her knuckles white, while Dad hovered behind her like he was afraid she'd shatter if he touched her wrong. "I can manage, Mark," she said, but her voice wavered. That's when Grandma Evelyn showed up unannounced, taking one look at the situation and immediately taking charge. "Sarah, honey, why don't we set you up in the downstairs guest room?" Mom started to protest, but Grandma just raised her eyebrow in that way she has. And suddenly we were all moving furniture and bringing down Mom's things. Dad disappeared into his home office halfway through, claiming he had an important work call. "Your father's always been better at running than facing things head-on," Grandma said later as we folded Mom's clothes into the guest room dresser. "Even as a boy." I wanted to defend him, but I couldn't find the words. Instead, I held up one of Mom's favorite sweaters, the soft blue one she always wore to my school events. It hung loose from my hands like it was already empty. "Have you told Maya?" Grandma asked, watching me carefully. I shook my head. "Nobody knows. Well, except Mrs. Green, I think. She keeps finding excuses to check on me in the library. Sometimes the people who say the least understand the most." Grandma squeezed my shoulder. "Speaking of understanding, when was the last time you worked on those college applications?" "I can't think about that right now." "Yes, you can and you will." Her voice was gentle but firm. "Your mother would want." "Don't." I pulled away. "Please don't tell me what Mom would want." Later that evening, I found Dad in his office, staring at his computer screen without really seeing it. Empty coffee cups littered his desk, and his tie hung loose around his neck. "Dad." I waited for him to look at me. "The hospital called. They moved Mom's appointment to tomorrow morning." He rubbed his eyes. I have a meeting I can't reschedule. But you promised. I know what I promised, Ella. His voice had an edge I'd never heard before. But someone has to keep working to pay for all of this. I felt something snap inside me. Right, because that's what matters right now. Work. Don't take that tone with me. What tone should I take? The words burst out before I could stop them. The one where I pretend everything's fine? Where we all just watch Mom get worse while you hide in here with your precious meetings? His chair scraped back as he stood. That's enough. You're right, it is enough. I turned to leave but paused at the door. I'll take Mom to her appointment. At least one of us should be there. I slammed the door harder than necessary and nearly ran into Maya, who was just coming up the front walk as I stormed outside. Whoa, she said, catching my arm. Where's the fire? I opened my mouth to give my usual everything's fine response, but what came out instead was a sob. Maya didn't say anything, just pulled me into a hug right there on the front porch. It's my mom, I finally managed to say. She's dying. Saying it out loud made it real in a way it hadn't been before. Maya held me tighter as I told her everything. The conversation I'd overheard, Dad's retreat into work, the way Mom tried to pretend she wasn't in pain. Why didn't you tell me sooner? She asked when I finished. Because then it would be true, I whispered. We sat on the porch steps until the sun started to set. Through the window, I could see Grandma helping Mom into bed, Dad's office door still firmly closed. The distance between us all seemed to grow wider with each passing day, like we were planets slowly drifting apart in our own separate orbits of grief. I didn't know it then, but this was just the beginning of how everything would fall apart. Mom died on a Tuesday. By Friday, Dad was already talking about moving forward and getting back to normal. 2 months later, he introduced us to Vivian. I was in the kitchen making tea when they walked in, Dad's hand resting on the small of her back like it used to rest on Mom's. The woman was tall, elegant, with perfectly styled blonde hair and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Ella, this is Vivian, Dad said, his voice carrying a forced cheerfulness that made my stomach turn. We've been seeing each other at grief counseling. I nearly dropped the mug I was holding. Grief counseling. The sessions he'd started attending instead of visiting Mom in the hospital during her final weeks. It's so wonderful to finally meet you, Vivian said, stepping forward with outstretched arms. Your father talks about you constantly. I stepped back, avoiding the hug. Does he? That's news to me. Dad's face tightened. Yeah. I have homework, I said, grabbing my tea and heading for the stairs. As I left, I heard Vivian's soft voice. Give her time, Mark. This must be so hard for her. The way she said it made my skin crawl. Over the next few weeks, Vivian became a constant presence in our house. She rearranged the furniture, replaced Mom's old curtains with modern blinds, and slowly began moving her things into Dad's room. Into Mom's room. One afternoon, I came home to find her going through Mom's closet. Oh, Ella! She jumped slightly, holding one of Mom's sweaters. I was just organizing things. Your father thought it might be time to donate some of these. Did he? My voice came out flat. Funny, he hasn't mentioned anything to me about it. Well, you know how men are. She laughed lightly. They avoid these difficult conversations. But it's been 3 months, sweetie. We need to start fresh. Like she was already part of the family. I grabbed the sweater from her hands. These aren't yours to give away. Ella, she said, her tone shifting to something harder. I know this is difficult, but your father and I are trying to build something here. We need your support, not your teenage attitude. Before I could respond, Dad appeared in the doorway. Everything okay in here? Of course, darling, Vivian said, her voice honey-sweet again. Ella and I were just having a little chat about moving forward. That night, I called Grandma Evelyn in tears. She's going through Mom's things, I whispered into the phone, hiding in my bedroom. Dad's letting her change everything like Mom was never even here. Oh, sweetheart. Grandma's voice was tight with anger. Have you talked to your father about how this makes you feel? He doesn't listen anymore. It's like, I swallowed hard. It's like he's becoming a different person around her. The next morning, I found Mom's jewelry box missing from her dresser. When I confronted Vivian, she blinked innocently. Mark gave those to me, she said. He thought I should have them since we're getting married. The world tilted sideways. What? Oh. She covered her mouth with perfectly manicured fingers. Was that supposed to be a surprise? I'm so sorry, I thought he'd told you. I ran to the bathroom and threw up, my hands shaking as I gripped the toilet bowl. Through the wall, I could hear Vivian's voice. Mark, she's upset. Maybe we should have waited to tell her. That afternoon, I sat in the school library, staring blankly at my archaeology textbook while Mrs. Green watched me with concern. Maya sat beside me, her hand on my arm. There's something off about her, I said. The way she acts when Dad's not around, the things she says. Document everything, Maya said firmly. Times, dates, what she does. If something's really wrong, you'll need proof. I nodded, pulling out my phone to start a notes file. As I typed, I remembered something Mom used to say about archaeology. Sometimes the truth lies in the smallest details, the things most people overlook. I glanced up to see Vivian's car pulling into the school parking lot. She wasn't supposed to pick me up today. Dad was. Something cold settled in my stomach as I watched her step out of the car, that perfect smile fixed on her face as she walked toward the building. The game was just beginning, and I had a feeling the rules were about to change. The first time Vivian hit me, I almost convinced myself it was an accident. We were in the kitchen, arguing about the box of Mom's old recipes I'd found in the trash. Her hand flew out, quick as a snake, catching my cheek. The shock hurt more than the slap. Oh, sweetie. Her eyes went wide with practiced concern. You shouldn't have gotten in my personal space like that. Look what you made me do. I touched my stinging cheek, watching her carefully. I'll tell Dad. She smiled, and something cold slithered down my spine. Tell him what? That you got aggressive while I was trying to clean? That you've been hostile since day one? She sighed dramatically. Poor Mark, he's so worried about your emotional state lately. I've been documenting everything like Maya suggested, but this was different. This was war. The next morning, Dad was already gone when I came down for breakfast. Vivian sat at the kitchen table, scrolling through her phone while sipping coffee from Mom's favorite mug. Your father's concerned about your grades, she said without looking up. He thinks maybe you should focus on something more practical than archaeology. I agree. My hands clenched around my backpack straps. Really? Because last week he said he was proud of my college applications. Things change. She finally looked at me, her eyes hard despite her sweet smile. Family dynamics change. You understand, don't you? School, I hid in the library during lunch, my hand shaking as I added to my notes file. Mrs. Green appeared with a cup of tea like she always did these days. Everything all right, Ella? She asked, her eyes lingering on my cheek where concealer covered the faint bruise. Fine, I said automatically, then hesitated. Actually, do you know anything about documenting abuse? Her expression shifted subtly. I might have some resources that could help. Hypothetically speaking, of course. That afternoon, Maya and I sat in her bedroom going through my phone's photo gallery. Pictures of Mom's missing things, screenshots of texts from Vivian, dates and times of accidents. This is seriously messed up, Maya said, scrolling through the evidence. Have you shown your dad? He wouldn't believe me. You should see how he looks at her like she's some kind of savior. I hugged my knees to my chest. Besides, she's already got him thinking I'm unstable. What about your grandmother? Before I could answer, my phone buzzed with a text from Vivian. Coming to pick you up. We need to talk about your attitude. My stomach lurched. I have to go. Wait. Maya grabbed my arm. Stay here tonight. My mom won't mind. If I don't go home, it'll just be worse later. Car ride was silent. When we got home, Dad's car was in the driveway, unexpected and terrifying. Inside, he sat at the kitchen table with papers spread out in front of him. Ella, he said, his voice tight. Care to explain these? My heart stopped. On the table were printouts of my college applications, the ones I'd secretly submitted to archaeology programs. I found them while organizing your room, Vivian said sweetly. I was so concerned about you going behind your father's back. You went through my room? I turned to Dad. She went through my things. Don't change the subject, he snapped. We agreed you'd apply to business schools. This is exactly the kind of reactive behavior Vivian's been telling me about. The betrayal felt like a physical blow. I looked between them, Dad's disappointed face, Vivian's perfectly crafted concern, and something inside me broke. Mom would have supported me, I said quietly. Dad flinched. Vivian's mask slipped for just a second, showing the anger underneath. Go to your room, Dad said. We'll discuss this when you're ready to be reasonable. I ran upstairs, locking my door before pulling out my phone. My hands trembled as I scrolled through my contacts, stopping at Grandma Evelyn's number. A new text from Maya popped up. Did you get home okay? Another from Mrs. Green. Those resources are in your locker whenever you need them. I took a deep breath and pressed call on Grandma's number. As it rang, I could hear Vivian's voice drifting up from downstairs, soft and reasonable, spinning her web around my father. Grandma! My voice cracked. I need help. Pregnancy announcement came during dinner, like a bomb dropped between the mashed potatoes and green beans. Dad beamed while Vivian touched her stomach with theatrical tenderness. I focused on my plate, pushing food around while they discussed nursery colors and baby names. You'll have a little brother or sister, Vivian said, reaching for my hand across the table. Won't that be wonderful? I pulled away, my fork clattering against my plate. I have to study. That night, I called Grandma Evelyn again. They're having a baby. Oh, sweetheart. Her voice was tight with concern. Are you safe there? I don't know anymore. The next few weeks were a blur of morning sickness, Vivian's, not mine, and Dad running around like an excited puppy. She played it perfectly, acting weak and vulnerable while shooting me knowing looks when he wasn't watching. Then came the stairs incident. I was heading down to the kitchen when I heard them arguing. Vivian's voice drifted up, trembling with tears. I just don't understand why she hates me so much, Mark. I'm trying so hard. I froze on the landing, listening. She's still grieving, Dad said. We all are. But the way she looks at me, the things she says when you're not around. I'm worried about the baby, Mark. This kind of stress isn't good for us. I started to turn back, but the stair creaked. They both looked up. Were you spying on us? Vivian's face transformed, tears vanishing. I was just... She rushed up the stairs, faster than any pregnant woman should move. As she passed me, her shoulder knocked into mine hard. I stumbled, catching myself on the railing. Ella, she screamed, grabbing her stomach. What are you doing? Dad appeared at the bottom of the stairs. What happened? She pushed me. Vivian was crying again, those instant tears. I was just trying to talk to her and she pushed me. I didn't, but Dad's face had already hardened. Go to your room, he said. Now. 3 days later, Vivian lost the baby. The doctors called it a miscarriage, but she had a different story. It was the stress, she told Dad while I listened from the hallway. The constant tension, the way she's been acting. I tried to protect our baby, Mark, but she just wouldn't stop. That night, I found all of Mom's remaining photos removed from the walls. When I confronted Dad, he exploded. Enough, he shouted. Vivian needs peace right now. She needs to heal. Why can't you understand that? Mom needed peace too, I shot back. She needed you, but you were too busy with work. And now you're too busy with her to see what she really is. His hand twitched, and for a second I thought he might hit me. Instead, he just looked disappointed. Somehow that was worse. You're grounded, he said quietly. No phone, no computer except for schoolwork. And you'll apologize to Vivian. I ran to my room, slamming the door. My phone buzzed one last time before Dad could confiscate it. A text from Maya. Mrs. Green found something. You need to see this. The next morning, I pretended to leave for school but doubled back through the kitchen door. I needed evidence, something concrete to show Dad what Vivian really was. I found her in Mom's old studio, going through a box of family photos. She looked up, unsurprised. I wondered when you'd try something like this, she said calmly. You're so predictable, Ella. Just like your mother was. My blood ran cold. What do you mean? She smiled, pulling out a photo I'd never seen before. Mom, years younger, standing with Vivian? Your mother and I have more history than you know, she said. And now I'm going to finish what I started back then. The photo slipped from my trembling fingers as everything suddenly clicked into place. This wasn't just about Dad or the baby. This was about Mom. And I was next. I ran all the way to school that morning, my lungs burning and the photograph crumpled in my pocket. Mrs. Green was waiting in the library with Maya, both of their faces grim. Show her, Maya said. Mrs. Green slid a yellowed newspaper clipping across the table. The headline made my stomach lurch. Local woman found dead after house fire. Husband's girlfriend primary suspect. That's Vivian, I whispered, staring at the grainy photo. Different name, but it's her. Charges were dropped, Mrs. Green said quietly. Insufficient evidence. The husband refused to testify. My hands shook as I pulled out the photograph from home. She knew my mom. Before everything. Maya grabbed my arm. Ella, your neck. I touched the spot where Vivian's nails had dug in during our confrontation, feeling the raised welts. It doesn't matter. We have to show this to Dad. We need to call the police, Mrs. Green insisted. They won't believe me. They'll just... The library door opened. Vivian stood there, perfectly composed in her designer outfit, Dad right behind her. There you are, she said sweetly. We've been so worried. Dad looked exhausted, his tie askew. Ella, come homme. We need to talk about your behavior. Mark, Mrs. Green stepped forward. There's something you need to see. I know about the accusations, he cut her off. Vivian told me everything. How you've been encouraging Ella's paranoid behavior, feeding into her grief. My world tilted sideways. Dad, no. It's time to go, Vivian said, her hand closing around my arm. Her nails dug into the same spots as before, making me wince. Mrs. Green moved to intervene, but Dad blocked her path. This is a family matter. Mark, Mrs. Green tried again. Look at your daughter. Really look at her. But he was already steering me toward the door, Vivian's grip never loosening. Maya called after me, but her voice was drowned out by the ringing in my ears. Car ride home was silent. When we arrived, Vivian went straight upstairs while Dad led me to the kitchen. I found these in your room, he said, dropping a stack of papers on the table. My documentation, my photos, everything I'd collected. Vivian's right. This obsession isn't healthy. Dad, please. We're sending you to a treatment facility, he said. Just for a few weeks. To help you process your grief. The world stopped. What? It's already arranged. You leave tomorrow morning. You can't. I can, he snapped. I'm your father. This is for your own good. I ran upstairs, slamming my door and grabbing my phone to call Grandma Evelyn. No signal. The Wi-Fi was down too. Vivian appeared in my doorway. Looking for this? She held up the router cable. We thought it best to limit your access. Wouldn't want you spreading more lies. They're not lies, I said, my voice breaking. You knew Mom. That photo. Oh, that. She smiled. Sarah always was too trusting. Just like you. What did you do to her? Nothing she didn't bring on herself. Vivian stepped closer. Sometimes people just get sick, Ella. Sometimes accidents just happen. The implications hit me like a physical blow. You made her sick? Prove it, she whispered, then turned and walked away, leaving my door open. I could hear Dad downstairs making calls about the treatment facility. Through my window, I saw Mrs. Green's car pull up, then Grandma Evelyn's. Dad met them in the driveway, arguing. My phone was useless. My evidence was gone. Tomorrow I'd be locked away where no one would believe me. I looked at my bedroom window, then at the tree outside. 3 stories up, but the branches were strong. The Mom used to joke about how she'd caught me climbing it to sneak out when I was younger. Mom, who might not have died from natural causes after all. I grabbed my backpack and opened the window. Sometimes running away isn't cowardice, sometimes it's survival. Behind me, I heard Vivian's footsteps coming back up the stairs. It was now or never. Grandma Evelyn's attic became my darkroom, where I developed the photos from Mom's old camera I'd grabbed during my escape. Most were blank or ruined, but one stopped my heart. Vivian in our kitchen months before Mom got sick, barely visible in the background of a family dinner photo. Found something? Maya asked from the doorway. I handed her the photo. 3 weeks had passed since I'd climbed down that tree, since Grandma and Mrs. Green had helped me disappear. Dad's calls had gone from angry to pleading to silence. Look at what she's holding, I said, pointing to Vivian's hand. A small bottle, half hidden behind her back. Maya's eyes widened. Is that? I found more, I said, spreading out other photos on the table. Different names, different cities. Always the same pattern. She gets close to grieving men with teenage daughters. Then accidents happen. We have to show the police. Not yet. I pulled out my phone, showing her the text I'd received that morning. Missing your mother's things? Come alone to the house at midnight. Tell anyone and they disappear forever. Ella no. She has Mom's journal. Her real jewelry, not the fake she claimed Dad gave her. I took a shaky breath. And maybe proof of what she did. Maya grabbed my arm. This is crazy. She's dangerous. So am I. That night, I slipped into my old house through the kitchen door, still broken from when Dad kicked it last summer. The house was dark except for Mom's studio upstairs. Vivian stood at Mom's old desk, looking through a leather-bound book. Mom's journal. I wondered if you'd come, she said without turning around. You're so like her. Same weakness for sentiment. Why did you do it? She laughed softly. Do you know what it's like, watching other women live the life you deserve? Sarah had everything. The devoted husband, the perfect daughter, the beautiful home. Her voice hardened. She didn't deserve it. So you poisoned her. Prove it. She finally turned. Oh, wait, you can't. The evidence is all gone, just like it was with the others. Your father won't believe you. No one will. That's where you're wrong. I pulled out my phone, recording light blinking. Say it again. Tell me how you killed my mother. Her face twisted. She lunged for the phone, but I was ready. We grappled, crashing into Mom's photography equipment. A flash went off, momentarily blinding us both. You stupid girl, she snarled, fingers clawing for my throat. I'll make it look like suicide. Just like I planned before you ran. The studio door burst open. Dad stood there, face ashen, his phone also recording. Behind him, Mrs. Green and 2 police officers. Mark, Vivian's voice instantly transformed, becoming soft and frightened. She attacked me. I heard everything, he said, his voice breaking. I heard what you did to Sarah. She lunged for the window, but the officers were faster. As they led her away, she locked eyes with me one last time. "You're just like her," she spat. "Weak." "No," I said quietly. "I'm the one who stopped you." Later, sitting on the porch with Dad, I finally asked the question that had been burning inside me. "How did you know to come?" "Your grandmother," he said, looking older than I'd ever seen him. "She showed me the photos you found. Made me really look at them." He turned to me, eyes wet. "I'm so sorry, Ella. I should have seen it. Should have protected you both." I thought about Mom, about justice and revenge, about the fine line between them. "We can't change what happened," I said finally. "But we can choose what happens next." He nodded, understanding. Inside, I could hear Maya and Mrs. Green going through Mom's recovered belongings. Life wouldn't magically fix itself, but for the first time since Mom died, I felt like I could breathe again. Sometimes the best revenge isn't about destroying your enemy, it's about refusing to let them destroy you. 6 months after Vivian's arrest, I stood in Mom's old studio, now converted into my darkroom. The acceptance letter from the University of Chicago's archaeology program lay on the desk beside a stack of photographs, evidence from Vivian's trial, pictures of Mom, memories both painful and precious. "Ready?" Dad asked from the doorway. I nodded, carefully packing the last of Mom's cameras. The house was sold, we were both moving on. Dad to a smaller place closer to his new therapy practice, me to Grandma Evelyn's until college started. "Found this while packing," he said, holding out a worn book. "It was your mother's. The journal. The one Vivian had been reading that night." My hands trembled as I opened it, a sealed envelope falling from between its pages. My name written in Mom's handwriting. "I'll give you a minute," Dad said quietly, stepping out. I sat in Mom's old chair, unfolding the letter. "My dearest Ella, if you're reading this, then my suspicions about Vivian were right. I'm so sorry I couldn't protect you from what was coming, but I knew you would be strong enough to face it. You always were the brave one." I recognized her the moment she started volunteering at the hospital, the woman who destroyed my college roommate's family years ago. By then, it was too late. The doctors couldn't explain why I was getting sicker so quickly. But you, my brilliant girl, you figured it out. Just like you'll figure out your own path in life. Don't let anyone tell you archaeology is just digging up the past. It's about uncovering truth, preserving stories that need to be told. Your story needs to be told. All my love. Mom. Maya found me there later, still holding the letter. "Mrs. Green's here," she said. "The police want to talk to you about another case. Apparently, your evidence helped them reopen some old investigations." I thought about Vivian's words that night, just like the others. How many families had she destroyed? How many stories needed to be uncovered? In the kitchen, Mrs. Green was showing Dad a newspaper article about Vivian's previous victims. "Their daughters want to meet you," she told me. "When you're ready." "I'd like that," I said, surprising myself. Later, standing in the driveway with the last boxes packed, I watched Dad struggling to lock the front door. Key stuck, it always had. "Here," I said, showing him the trick Mom had taught me. "You have to lift and turn at the same time." He smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes. "When did you get so wise?" "I had good teachers." Grandma Evelyn pulled up in her car, Maya riding shotgun. They'd insisted on helping with the move, on being there for this final goodbye. "You know," Dad said as we walked to our separate cars, "your mother would be proud of you, not just for stopping Vivian, but for staying true to yourself. The archaeology program, the photography." "I know," I said, thinking of Mom's letter. "She always was." As we drove away, I watched our house disappear in the rearview mirror. Place where I'd learned about loss and betrayal, but also about strength and truth. Where I'd learned that sometimes the most important discoveries aren't artifacts buried in the ground, but the stories buried in plain sight. Maya turned around from the front seat. "You okay?" I touched the camera hanging around my neck, Mom's old one, the one that had helped expose Vivian's truth. Yeah, I said. I think I am. That evening, developing photos in Grandma's attic-turned-darkroom, I found one last shot from that final confrontation with Vivian. The accidental flash had captured something remarkable, her mask slipping, revealing the desperation beneath. A reminder that sometimes the most dangerous monsters are the ones who look most human. I pinned it to my wall alongside Mom's letter and my college acceptance. 3 pieces of a story that wasn't quite finished, because the best stories never really end, they just become part of who we are. Tomorrow, I'd start packing for college. Tonight, I had photos to develop, truth to uncover, and a mother's legacy to honor. After all, that's what archaeologists do. We piece together the past to understand our present and maybe, just maybe, to build a better future.